Chapter 5093. In this barrier, all the disciples looked at Jian Wushuang nervously. Before they knew it, they had pinned their hopes on this young man Yanxian. Seeing the back of Jian Wushuang, who released the strength to stabilize the enchantment, Gong Zizhio's eyes were cold and resentful. He didn't understand why the strongest would have good ties with Jian Wushuang. It would be fine if it was Yanxian, but it happened that Dianxian appeared endlessly beside him. Even rank 6 and rank 9 Dianxian could mix with him. Damn it, how did this guy do it? The sun was almost mad with jealousy. Jian Wushuang, don't be proud, this seat will stomp you on your feet one day. This time, the big palm covering the sky covered by the black robe old man no longer worked. As the light and shadow shattered, the big palm covering the sky was also directly divided. The dark purple bizarre Huamang crazily erode the power and the way of heaven. It was actually a blow from the black robe old man. Okay. The big palm covering the sky shattered into billions of streams of light spilling into the void, and the black robe elder was puzzled, and the black robe that had just recovered seemed to be stronger than before. The first fight did not cause any serious damage to the black robe, which made him begin to solemnly. The black robe elder, who has experienced countless battles since the ancient times, also felt the black robe very different at this moment. He couldn't feel the flow of any derivative force from the body of the black robe, not even the slightest wave of derivative force. This makes the black robe old man extremely strange. Yanli is the fundamental power of the entire big division, even the ultimate evangelism. No monk, or even Yuxian, can get rid of the evangelical power, even for the emperor. But right now, the black robe completely did not drive Yanli. The dark purple Huameng he used was extremely peculiar and fundamentally different from Yanli. For a while, the black-robed old man had many thoughts, but he was quickly forgotten. The danger of living is worth thinking about, while the danger of death is not called danger. The void oscillated, and the heavenly order shattered again. The black-robed old man stepped away, and he stretched out his right palm and pointed like a sword, slashing towards the black robe. Like the immortal black robe, it seemed to be more agile than before. Facing the supremely powerful black robe old man, he actually knew how to avoid his edge. Struggle. At the same time, Jian Wushuang, who was standing on the top of the sacred mountain watching the battle, looked at the black robe solemnly. He noticed that the black robe seemed to be adapting to it, and at the same time stronger than before. Could it be that without touching the source, every time you die, you will get stronger? Jian Wushuang was thinking, and at the same time faintly worried about the black robe old man. The reason why he has been talking about death-seeking is most likely that the situation of the fairy body has really reached the end of the force. Under this premise, even if the black-robed old man is pinnacle Dian immortal, he is very likely to fall into a passive state. In the void of eternal extinguishment and nothingness, a more violent battle broke out. As a black-robed old man who was already at the peak of the ancient times, his background is simply unimaginable. He can wave his hand at will and he can create thousands of chains of heavenly order. Chains of order from the heavens, like a broken ancient dragon, emerged from the void and twisted toward the black robe. There are too many hesitations about the chains of heavenly order, and he can't avoid it at all, and he is instantly entangled in it. Looking at the ancient voices, every chain of the heavenly order trembles at this moment, and a series of dark cyan dense patterns appear. At this moment, centered on the black robe bound by the entanglement, 999 chains of heavenly order broke out at the same time. The luck contained in every chain of heaven order is the full blow of the black robe old man. The 999 chains of heaven order are 990 full blows. The emptiness that becomes eternal and nihilistic is therefore discolored. The supreme air luck that belonged to the peak Dian immortal broke out completely, and the black robe that was entangled in the body and couldn't get out of it began to shatter directly under the suppression of this air luck. Obviously, the body of the black robe couldn't bear so many chain lashes of the order of the heavens at all, and fine cracks quickly formed. And the black robe old man came to the black robe at this moment. His face was solemn, as if he had noticed something, and he said directly, "You are not a fairy in the Great Division. What is your origin, the remnants of the heavens from the past?" The black robe did not speak, and the body under the wide black robe seemed to be broken at any time. The black-robed old man narrowed his eyes, and he realized that even he couldn't see the face under the black-robed hood at all. From beginning to end, he was extremely secretive. "What on earth are you from?" The black-robed old man repeated it again. This time, Hypo slowly raised his head and looked at him. At such a close distance, he couldn't see the face under his hood, only the dark purple haze, which was quite strange. This black robe, who walked out of the bone armor with the sky character pattern and whose identity is all mysterious, finally spoke. The hoarse voice seemed to be separated by countless years and times. "Peep at the ciphertext, die." The black robe old man condensed his brows. "What's ciphertext say?" "Peep at the ciphertext, die." Hypo repeated it again. He suddenly raised his head and looked directly at the black robe old man. Two black lights shot out from under the hood like long swords. Unprepared, the black-robed old man stared at him, and there was a moment of dazzling. At this moment, under the black robe, a purple glow burst out like a sword. This purple light pierced the black-robed old man's chest fiercely through the chains of heavenly order. In an instant, the 990 chains of heaven's order broke down, and the supreme luck was going crazy. "Senior!" Jian Wushuang yelled and rushed to the black-robe old man without hesitation. Being penetrated by Zimeng's chest, even Pinnacle Dian's chest was broken at this moment. "You wanna die?" The invisible sword enveloping the red-gold Xuanhe pattern had already condensed. Jian Wushuang stepped on the void, and suddenly threw the invisible sword in his hand towards the black robe. At this moment, even the monstrous dark purple haze was retreating. Boom! The blazing invisible sword also pierced the chest of the black robe, and the purest Wushuang swordsmanship exploded in his body. The black robe, which was already densely covered with cracks, could no longer withstand this degree of fluctuation, and it was broken into powder. Jian Wushuang didn't even look at the place where the black robe body fell, and raised his hand to protect the black robe old man who was falling. "Senior, how are you doing?" The black-robed old man looked pale, and his supreme luck quickly disappeared from his broken chest. He said in a hoarse voice, "The situation seems to be a little uncomfortable, and now my chest pain is a bit severe." Chapter 5094. Although Jian Wushuang was anxious, he quickly calmed down. He fixed his eyes, and in front of the broken chest of the black-robe old man, there was a lingering dark purple brilliance flowing slowly. Under his thoughts, Jian Wushuang quickly took out 2D pin pills. One was stuffed into the mouth of the black-robed old man, and the other was crushed directly to the wound. At the entrance of the pill, the black-robed old man stared suddenly, which belonged solely to the power of the Emperor Pin Pill, which was so powerful that it could not be vainly stated, even the Pinnacle Dian Immortal was enough to fully recover. At the entrance of the pill, feeling the extremely powerful medicinal effect, the black-robe old man quickly closed his eyes and began to adjust his breath. But Jian Wushuang didn't dare to neglect, and stretched out his hand to pull out the smog and dust that covered the wound. Nanha craftsman Su Tuo and others also rushed to release Yanli together to protect the black-robe old man. Time passed by, and his trauma slowly stabilized. Finally, the black-robed old man slowly opened his eyes and looked at Jian Wushuang with bright eyes. Then excitedly said with a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Good boy, where did you get this pill? How can it taste the same as the old man stealing it back then?" Jian Wushuang was full of black lines, a little messy. He never thought that the first thing the black-robed old man would wake up was actually saying this. Immediately afterwards, the black-robed old man looked proud again. "Good boy, it seems that you have given the old guy's nest." The corners of his mouth twitched. "Senior, it seems you don't hurt anymore." Speaking of this, the black-robed old man is considered a serious face. "The pain doesn't hurt anymore, but that guy pushed me one more step toward death." Jian Wushuang knew that his words were true, and he was inevitably declining, because his luck was too severe and could not be condensed at all and could only be released. Coupled with this battle, it pushed the black-robed old man to his death. Well, now that this matter is over, the old man will continue to wait for death. The black-robed old man uttered his mantra and completely put aside life and death. However, just as his words fell, his complexion suddenly changed, and his gaze also looked into the sky far away. No, that group of guys are here too. Jian Wushuang instantly became vigilant, but before he could speak, the black-robed old man hurriedly roared, "Little guy, what about the spar I gave you earlier? Run out and let the old man go in and hide." Jian Wushuang did so, and after taking out the black diamond crystal from the boyang bottle, the black-robed old man plunged directly into it and disappeared. He was wary and wondering, who was the one who would make the black-robed old man so jealous? In the next moment, from the depths of the endless void, a magnificent and supreme luck appeared, covering the sky. These lucks are not just one, but there are dozens of them. Come back. Nan Xian was about to be tossed feebly. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes slightly, and he felt the magnificent luck that covered the sky, and he did not carry any horrible killing intent. He thought to himself, could it be someone from heaven? It seems to be to confirm his conjecture. A total of 10 roads carrying the light wheels of Yanli, carrying the treasures of supreme luck, stepped into the air. Really come from heaven. Jian Wushuang frowned, and soon realized that it must have been the aura of destruction emanating from the sky that had disturbed the heavenly court, so he sent the veteran to investigate. But in a short while, the 10 treasures came here. Their faces are majestic, full of photographs. With their arrival, the unspeakable order of heaven was reconstructed, becoming an eternal void of nothingness and beginning to stabilize. Everyone is careful. These people are all celestial elders. The craftsman Su Tuo reminded in a low voice, his eyes solemn. So this is the veteran of heavenly court. Nan Xian whispered thoughtfully. And Gongzi Jiao was completely relieved. As the son of the emperor, there is no elder who is closer to the heavens than him. Headed by the 10 treasures, is a glaring figure, clean face without need and full of cold breath. He took a step forward, his gaze slowly swept across Jian Wushuang and the others, and after staying on the figures of Jian Wushuang and Gongzi Jiao for a moment, he withdrew his gaze again. Who did it here? Angrily asked in a cold voice. Unimaginable oppression followed. Rank 9 Dian Immortal. Jian Wushuang first determined that these veterans who have survived from the Wanggu era to the present are all 9th rank Dian Immortal, and there is even a pinnacle Dian Immortal. In the face of these terrible existences, wanting to resist is sheer nonsense. At this moment, all were silent. The cause of this devastation was too complicated. The black robe of the initiator had completely disappeared, and it was impossible to dialectically. What's more, the heavenly court is not a good person, and if it causes such damage to devotion, it may be restrained by the heavenly court. This was Jian Wushuang's worry, so he didn't intend to speak. And Nan Xian also shook his head and looked around, with an unaware expression. The craftsman Su Tuo also gritted his teeth and remained silent. He knew that such terrible damage had been caused to the heavens. Once found by the heavens, Yukanshu www.Ukanshu.com would inevitably be exiled to a deserted place for years. At this time, the son who had not spoken to correct, took a step forward slowly, Zhenyao Xianjun. Without finishing a sentence, the angry figure called Zhenyao Xianjun directly interrupted him, and said coldly, "Your Highness, did I let you speak?" The son suppressed the sound, his face turned blue and red, the anger in his eyes flashed away, and then he returned to the original place. Xianjun Zhenyao continued to patrol, and finally stopped on Jian Wushuang, who was watching his nose and his heart. "Jian Wushuang, tell me what's going on here." Jian Wushuang's figure stiffened slightly, rather helpless. He didn't know why this Zhenyao Xianjun knew his name, but he could faintly guess some of the connections. After pondering for a while, he said, "I originally came here with my companions to experience and visit the senior master craftsman by the way, but some unexpected big changes have taken place. An evil object suddenly arrived here and began to wreak havoc, and it was quickly destroyed. In order to prevent the world from being destroyed, the senior master craftsman and I took action together and began to resist the evil object. But the evil thing is too cruel, we are not his opponents at all. Just when we are all invincible and are about to die, the evil thing suddenly fled from here, and just after that, you are here. Now that I think about it, the evil thing suddenly fled. It must be because of fear of the supreme luck of the immortals, and thus quickly fled. After speaking, Jian Wushuang sighed in relief. With these words, while dripping water, he slapped another wave of flattery from the celestial elders, which made Nanxian a thumbs up in secret. Chapter 5095 Guardian of the Secret Text. In this realm, all disciples watched Jian Wushuang with intense anticipation. Unbeknownst to them, they had already placed all their hopes on this young Yen immortal. As they watched Jian Wushuang stabilize the barrier with his Yen power, Prince Jiu's gaze grew cold and resentful. He could not understand why the most powerful individuals were all friendly with Jian Wushuang. If it were just Yen immortal, it would be one thing, but even 6 and 9 revolutions grand Yen immortals seemed to flock to him. Damn it, how did this guy manage to do it? Prince Jiu was consumed by jealousy. Jian Wushuang, don't get too cocky. One day, I'll crush you beneath my feet. This time, the all-encompassing palm that descended from the black-robed elder failed to have the same effect. With shattered light and shattered shadows, the palm was directly dispersed. A strange, dark purple radiance aggressively consumed the Yen immortal power and even defied the heavens, withstanding the black-robed elder's attack. As the sky-breaking palm shattered into countless streams of light in the void, the black-robed elder looked puzzled. The previously weakened black-robed figure now seemed even more formidable. Their first confrontation hadn't inflicted any significant damage on the black-robed figure, causing the elder to grow wary. The black-robed elder, who had experienced countless battles since the ancient era, now sensed something entirely different about the black-robed figure. He could not sense any flow of Yen immortal power from the black-robed figure, not even the slightest ripple of it. This left the black-robed elder extremely perplexed. Yen power was the fundamental force of the entire Great Sea region, even the ultimate force of the Grand Yen immortal realm. No cultivator, not even emperors, could escape the influence of Yen power, let alone Yen immortals. But now, this black-robed figure appeared to have completely and utterly avoided using Yen power. The strange dark purple radiance he emitted was unique and fundamentally distinct from Yen immortal power. For a moment, the black-robed elder entertained many thoughts, but he quickly pushed them aside. There was only value in contemplating when one was in danger of losing their life, and there was no danger in death. The void trembled, and the order of the heavens shattered once more. The black-robed elder moved through the air, extending his right palm with finger-like blades, striking toward the black-robed figure. The seemingly indestructible black-robed figure appeared even more agile than before. Faced with the supremely powerful black-robed elder, he somehow managed to avoid the full force of the attack. The fierce battle raged on. At the same time, Jian Wushuang, who stood atop the divine mountain, gazed intently at the figure in the black-robed figure. He could sense that the black-robed figure was adapting to the surroundings and growing even stronger than before. Could it be that without touching the source, each death makes one stronger? Jian Wushuang pondered out loud, all the while harboring concerns for the old man in the black-robed figure. The old man's constant mention of seeking death may very well have indicated that the condition of his immortal body had truly reached its last stand. In this situation, even if the black-robed elder was a peak grand Yen immortal, he might find himself at a disadvantage. A more intense battle erupted within the eternal void, becoming a relentless clash. The black-robed elder, who had been a peak grand Yen immortal since ancient times, possessed an unfathomable foundation. He could casually conjure thousands of chains of heavenly Tao with a mere wave of his hand. Countless chains of heavenly Tao, resembling ancient colossal dragons, emerged from the void and entwined around the black-robed figure. There were simply too many of these chains of heavenly Tao for him to avoid, and in an instant, he found himself ensnared by them. Buzz! A resounding roar echoed through the ancient heavens, and in that moment, each chain of celestial order trembled, giving rise to intricate ink-blue patterns. At this moment, with the black-robed figure at its center, 999 chains of heavenly Tao simultaneously erupted with unparalleled force. The destiny contained within each chain of celestial order was equivalent to the black-robed elder's full-powered strike. 999 chains of heavenly Tao meant 999 full-powered strikes. Even the eternal void of endless annihilation was perturbed by this. The unparalleled fate energy of a peak grand yen immortal erupted completely, and the black-robed figure, bound and unable to escape, began to shatter under the crushing force of this fate energy. It was quite evident that the body beneath the black-robed figure couldn't withstand the relentless lashings of the heavenly order chains, rapidly developing fine cracks. At this moment, the old man in the black-robed figure arrived in front of the black-robed figure. His expression grew solemn, as if he had sensed something. He spoke directly, "You don't belong to the Great Sea region. Who are you really, and what is your origin? A remnant of the ancient heavenly court?" The black-robed figure remained silent, and it seemed that their body under the wide black-robed figure was on the verge of breaking apart at any moment. The old man in the black-robed figure narrowed his eyes. He could not even see the face beneath the hood, not even when it was himself attempting to do so. Throughout, this figure remained enigmatic to the extreme. "Who are you really?" the old man repeated. This time, the black-robed figures slowly raised their head to gaze at him. Even at such close proximity, their face beneath the hood remained hidden. All that could be seen was layer upon layer of dark purple mist, which was rather peculiar. Finally, the black-robed figure, who emerged from the heaven-patterned bone armor and whose identity was shrouded in mystery, spoke. Their hoarse voice seemed to have traversed countless ages and eras. "One who gazes upon the secret text shall perish." The black-robed elder furrowed his brow. "What secret text? Speak." "One who gazes upon the secret text shall perish." The phrase was repeated once more, and the figures suddenly raised their head, locking eyes with the old man in the black-robed figure. Two jet-black rays shot out from beneath the hood like elongated swords. Caught off guard, the old man momentarily lost focus as they stared back. In that very moment, a sword-like purple radiance burst forth from beneath the black-robed figure and pierced the old man's chest. In an instant, the 999 heavenly Tao chains shattered, and the fate energy vanished rapidly. "Senior!" Jian Wushuang shouted, without any hesitation, as he lunged toward the old man in the black-robed figure. Even the chest of a peak grand yen immortal like the old man was shattered by the purple radiance. "You seek death." The invisible sword, enveloped in blazing golden divine patterns, had already materialized, and Jian Wushuang, with his feet suspended in the void, hurled the invisible sword towards the black-robed figure. At this moment, even the overwhelming dark purple mist retreated. Boom! The incandescent, burning invisible sword also pierced through the black-robed figure's chest, and the purest form of the Wushuang sword Tao erupted within. The already heavily cracked black-robed figure couldn't withstand such an impact, and it shattered into fragments. Jian Wushuang did not look at where the black-robed figure had fallen. He raised his hand and caught the falling old man. "Senior, are you all right?" The black-robed elder's face turned pale, and the supreme fate energy quickly dissipated from his shattered chest. In a hoarse voice, he said, "The situation seems a bit dire. My chest is hurting quite badly now." Chapter 5096. Jian Wushuang nodded his head hurriedly. "I also ask Xianjun to take action as soon as possible. This evil thing is too shocking to the world. In order to prevent future troubles, please do it quickly." "Destroy? The old man can't be killed naturally. He has to be caught alive and handed over to the emperor." Zhenyao Xianjun made a decision, and then looked at the black robe again. Confused. Jian Wushuang shook his head, but he could no longer attract the attention of the veterans. Facing the black robe, the 10 Wangu veterans who walked out of the heavenly court released their own treasures. 10 veterans of the ancient times, 10 nine-turn great Yenxian, boundless luck directly in the nirvana, forming the supreme luck. This kind of luck is even beyond the scope of comprehension. Even Dian Immortal is like dust under this kind of supreme luck. Emperor's luck? Jian Wushuang was startled slightly, looking at the sky covering luck. He quickly understood. The reason why this kind of supreme luck is extremely terrifying is because there is the flow of Emperor's luck in it. The so-called Emperor's luck is the supreme thing, flowing in all things invisible, only the Emperor can control. As the elders and immortals who have followed the Emperor since the ancient times, although they cannot control the Emperor's luck, they often accompany the Emperor's side, and they will naturally be moistened by the Emperor's luck. After endless years, the luck of these elders and immortals naturally carried more or less the luck of emperors. Under this supreme atmosphere, all immortals tremble. There was the birth of the Qi luck that was pressing against the heavenly Tao, turning into branches and tangling around the black robe. It is foreseeable that once war starts, it will inevitably be even more tragic and terrifying. Jian Wushuang swallowed his throat and subconsciously shifted his figure. If it were to go to war, he would be tied into a zongzi, he would never escape. Evil thing, put your hands together. Zhen Yao Xianjun said loudly, trembling through the 9 heavens and 10 earth. Under the boundless atmosphere, the black robe slowly recovered, and he seemed to adapt to this suppression quickly. Then, from under the wide hood, 2 dark purple lights suddenly appeared. Looking for death. Immortal King Zhenyao was angry and waved to cover him down. Void shocks, along with his shot, the other 9 veterans also shot together. The huge palms of the 10 directions that contain the meaning of supremacy came down. Facing these 10 giant palms, the black robe was alone, lonely and treacherous, and did not make any escape movements. He slowly raised his head, then his arms were in a gesture of supporting the sky, and he chose a hard shake. Boom boom boom. At this moment, even the nirvana trembling to the point of unspeakable, and Jian Wushuang and others were knocked into the air by the sound wave, retreating thousands of feet. The boundless Qi luck faded in an instant, and the branches of Qi luck shattered. Okay. All the elders, Xianjun, were asking questions, and after a glance, he stared at the black robe. Under the boundless and supreme luck, the giant palms of the 10 directions that contain the meaning of supremacy did not cover it, but were abruptly caught by the black robe. The 10 big palms with light golden aura cracked fine cracks. At the cracks, wisps of dark purple huameng like mist were covered. Zhenyao Xianjun looked dignified. He looked at the other 9 veterans, and then squeezed his right hand again, and suddenly patted the black robe. The 9 veterans Xianjun didn't hesitate, and also slapped it. The 10-sided giant palm, which had been densely covered with cracks, seemed to have received some kind of blessing. The cracks were instantly repaired, and bright golden glow appeared. Under the giant palms of the 10 directions, the black robe, which was holding the sky, could not bear the weight, and instantly fell apart, and his body was crushed. Zhenyao Xianjun said in a deep voice, "You guys need to stay alive." The 9 veteran immortals simultaneously retracted their strength and stood with their hands behind them. Immediately afterwards, Zhenyao Xianjun jumped to the center of the boundless luck. His arms were broken, and the black robe sat on the ground, resisting the terrifying pressure brought by the luck. He frowned and said, "Who are you? Why do you want to destroy the sky?" Hei Pao said nothing, but slowly raised his head, shooting 2 cold glows from under the wide hood. Xianjun Zhenyao was slightly startled, and he couldn't see the face under the black robe from his realm. "The one who looks at the ciphertext, die." It was that sentence again, the black robe repeated, and then fell silent. "Who is watching the ciphertext?" Zhenyao Xianjun continued to ask, but no matter how he asked, the black robe fell silent and said nothing. For some reason, subconsciously, he turned around and looked at Jian Wushuang, who was thousands of feet away. Jian Wushuang, who was struggling to untie the chains of the heavenly order on his body, hurriedly calmed down when he felt the gaze coming from him, and continued to observe his nose and heart. It must be the trouble caused by this kid. Zhenyao Xianjun thought to himself, and then put aside these problems for the time being. Seeing this black robe that could even shake the 10 veterans Xianjun, Zhenyao Xianjun didn't have the slightest support. He waved his arm, and suddenly the boundless luck began to condense into chains. There are 10 chains in total, and each chain is formed by the luck of a veteran, Xianjun, and binds the black robe together. Then Zhenyao Xianjun took out a small cauldron from his waist and took the black robe directly into the cauldron. After all this was done, the void resumed its final state of nihilism. After looking back at Jian Wushuang, Zhenyao Xianjun looked ahead. Back to heaven. The fairy cloud shrouded, and the force flowed and rose. Because it is so pure that it becomes a liquid source of derivation, it converges to become a torrent waterfall flowing in the fairy mountain skystream. The cycle goes back and forth, endlessly. This is the supreme wonderland that one party can't speak arrogantly or look directly at it. Hidden in the misty clouds, Xiaoyuntai has never been stepped by the emperor for hundreds of millions of years. It is a relatively secret place in the whole heaven. At this moment, on the calm platform, in the misty clouds, Jian Wushuang, who was tied into a zongzi by the order of heaven, said helplessly, "What are you talking about? I just don't understand." "Really don't understand?" Zhenyao Xianjun squatted in front of him and said with a smile. Jian Wushuang said firmly, "I really don't understand. Even if you throw me into the sea of no edge, I still don't know what happened, and there is no result if you ask again." "Good boy, you still don't speak at this time. Do you really want the emperor to speak in person?" A veteran with black eyebrows and white beards couldn't help but persuade him. "Explain as soon as possible, destroy the universe to that extent, the consequences would be disastrous." Jian Wushuang hurriedly said, "Don't talk nonsense, I really didn't destroy that great sky. You have seen who destroyed it. You can confront him." "You!" The elder Xianjun with black eyebrows and white beards was suddenly angry and didn't know what to say. Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 5097. Looking at Jian Wushuang, who was unable to make progress, even Zhenyao Xianjun was quite a headache. "If you don't eat the soft ones, you can't come with the hard ones. If you want to know some secrets, I'm afraid you have to dig from other Yanxian." Thinking of this, Zhenyao Xianjun looked at the craftsman Su Tuo and said, "Old man, you should always know something, right?" Su Tuo shook his head without hesitation. "Everything happened too fast, even if I want to know something, it's too late." Zhenyao Xianjun offered a condition: "You speak out, and I will ask the emperor to return you a heaven that is more perfect than Sansuan Mountain." Su Tuo shook his head, and then said nothing. "You old fellow, I see when you hold back," he said angrily. Nan Xian quickly put aside the relationship. "Don't look at me, I don't know anything, it's just a passing by Xian, it has nothing to do with me." Zhenyao Xianjun got up angrily and didn't ask anything at all. Immediately afterwards, the cloud and smoke around the Xiaoyuntai suddenly had a gilt color flowing over, full of a sensational trend. The veteran Xianjun's complexion changed slightly at the moment, and they all looked out of Xiaoyuntai with a serious face. A pure golden light broke through the layers of clouds and cast onto the huge dojo in Xiaoyuntai. Then, the two treasures stepped down the clouds and came to the platform of Shaoyin. Seeing these two figures, Jian Wushuang was quite speechless. The craftsman Su Tuo was shocked, so he closed his eyes and stopped looking. Gongzi Jiao was both surprised and happy. Although Nan Xian had never been to the heavenly court, as Dian Immortal, he could naturally feel that kind of aura fluctuations, with incredible expressions in his eyes. As for the disciples of Sansuan Mountain, they had already passed out, and they didn't even have a chance to see the true face of the emperor. Those who came were Zhen Wuyang and Yu Chang, the lord of the whole heaven. "I have seen the emperor." Headed by Zhenyao Xianjun, the 10 veteran Xianjun saluted. Zhen Wuyang waved his hand, then slowly glanced at Jian Wushuang and the others. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "How is the situation in the sky?" Zhenyao Xianjun slightly nodded. "Returning to emperor, the situation is not very good, and 1/6 of the heaven has been beaten into nothingness." Zhen Wuyang's expression condensed. 1/6 of the heaven has been beaten into nothingness? It's true. They did it. I don't know at the moment. Zhenyao Xianjun looked rather embarrassed. However, the destroyers have been found. Upon hearing this, Zhen Wuyang looked at Jian Wushuang again, with a deep and majestic voice. "Jian Wushuang, why is there you in the sky? Shouldn't you be in the 6-day realm?" Jian Wushuang's mouth trembled slightly, and then he said, "That, I'm going to relax." "Relieve? Why didn't you go with Yenner?" Zhen Weiyang frowned slightly. Jinyao Xianjun hurriedly said, "Emperor, little emperor is the emperor, and should not walk around at will." Only then did Zhen Weiyang realize that the meaning was wrong, and after a light cough, he looked at Jinyao Xianjun. "Since the destroyer of the heavenly emperor has been found, let it out on the spot." He nodded, and then took off the small tripod around his waist and threw it into the air. In an instant, the great light of the Chinese Dingzhong burst out, and the chains of atmospheric transportation came out, and then a black robe fell on the ground. With the appearance of this black robe, the peaceful and quiet Zhaoyuntai quietly took up a dangerous atmosphere. At this moment, Zhen Weiyang and Yu Chang stared at the same time. The emperor's luck that belonged to the emperor came and directly suppressed the black robe. Bound by chains of atmospheric transport, and suppressed by the emperor's gas transport, the black robe that was originally strong enough to fight the Peak Dian Immortal collapsed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Zhen Weiyang condensed his eyes, waved his hand to lower the emperor's luck, and smashed the chains of the atmosphere on the black robe. Without the restraints, Hei robe got up directly, and an unspeakable treacherous aura burst out instantly. However, Zhen Weiyang just moved his palm to directly shatter the breath. The entire Shaoyan typhoon was surging and dark clouds appeared. Zhen Weiyang looked solemn and stared at the black robe closely. After a long time, he said slowly, "Where did you come from, and why would you destroy my big division?" The black robe raised his head, and a dull and barren voice came from under his hood, peeping at the ciphertext, "Death." Zhen Weiyang frowned. "Are you from Tongtian Buddha realm?" At this time, Yu Chang, who had not spoken, shook his head slightly. "It is unlikely that they are monks in the world of Tongtian Buddhism. They are very cautious and rarely break into the Great Division. Indeed, they also don't have hair." Zhen Weiyang followed up with a teasing, and then solemnly, "But why can't he understand his realm cultivation? Isn't he a fairy?" Peep at the ciphertext, "Die." Hypo repeated the same words again. Peeping at the ciphertext? Zhen Weiyang looked directly at Jian Wushuang, then waved his hand to carry him directly. "What is a ciphertext? Did you go to Dalmatian to find a ciphertext?" Jian Wushuang was dumb, and immediately after the chains of luck on his body were wiped off, he stood in front of Zhen Weiyang and Yu Chang. "That, I don't know too well. I haven't figured out any clues yet. The reason you went to Dalmatian is probably to find Su Tuo to find some ciphertexts?" Zhen Weiyang pointed out the crux of the problem. At this point, Jian Wushuang didn't want to hide too much. "Yes, it's because of this. It is possible to destroy 1/6 of the world of Domitian into nothingness. I am afraid it is just something he can't do." Zhen Weiyang stared at him closely. "Is it caused by your fighting?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. "With my strength, I just barely protect myself." "Who is at war with him?" "Chang Fu." "Chang Fu?" "Yes, he dragged the black robe at the cost of death." Zhen Weiyang frowned, which was bad news for him. Chang Fu is the 9-turn Dian immortal who came out of the Wanggu era. He has been following him for countless years, and after countless blood battles, and finally opened up the Desiyu, is the veteran hero of the heaven. But right now, the elders under his seat, Chang Fu, died silently. Slowly breathing out, Zhen Weiyang looked at Jian Wushuang and said, "Where did this black robe come from?" Regarding where the black robe came from, apart from Jian Wushuang, even Nan Xian and the craftsman Su Tuo could not guess. As long as he didn't say it, no Yanxian would know where the black robe came from. But now, Jian Wushuang faintly realized that the heavenly character bone armor was not as simple as imagined. It is even out of control in a sense. So far, Jian Wushuang has been convinced that the ciphertext hidden in the bone armor of the Tianzi pattern is related to Xuani. But everything has not been solved. It is still confusing, even dangerous. What is the origin of the black robe in the bone armor of the sky? Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 5098. Why is there such a terrifying existence in Xian Yi's final secret Tianzi pattern bone armor? Moreover, even Emperor Zhen Weiyang could not detect the realm of that black robe. In what form did he exist in the bone armor of the sky character, and how many years did he exist? Everything seems to surface, But everything involves more, like a mess of thread, there is no way to start. Jian Wushuang was silent for a moment and said, I walked out of a bone armor. Bone armor? What bone armor? Zhen Weiyang looked solemnly. A bone armor that contains ciphertexts is very mysterious, but it has now been destroyed, he said, and this black-robed man came out of the bone armor. It was unbelievable to walk out of the bone armor with a black-robed man whose strength was comparable to that of the peak Day Immortal. You know, even the 9th-rank Dayan Immortal is the closest to the great Emperor Dao to feel the existence of the Emperor's luck, let alone the peak Dayan Immortal. The peak Dayan Immortal is already an extreme existence. They have found and have been immersed in their own avenue for countless years, almost equivalent to the existence of a half-step emperor. And who can seal such a pinnacle great Yanxian in a small bone armor? Or he was sealed in it voluntarily? After hearing Jian Wushuang's remarks, Zhen Weiyang's eyes changed several times and finally returned to calm. In other words, you take such a bone armor and go to Demi Tian to find the fairy who can untie the cipher text above? Jian Wushuang nodded, yes, but I didn't expect that there would be such an existence in that bone armor. Zhen Wuyang Qi is it is purely nonsense. If there is more terrible existence in that bone armor, what do? Is it to ruin my big division? I'll settle the account with you later. Zhen Weiyang left this sentence and looked at the black robe. Then, the chains condensed by the Emperor's air luck directly confined the limbs of the black robe, and hung it in the center of the Xiao Yuntai, hanging in the air. Emperor Wei Huang, so that no fairy dared to look directly. Zhen Weiyang walked slowly in front of the black robe, and the Emperor's eyes showed supreme might. Where did you come from, and why do you stay in a bone armor? The clouds are rolling in the clouds, and the wind is blowing suddenly. There was a dead silence in the Xiaoyan Tai, and the black robe said nothing. Zhen Weiyang frowned. If you don't tell me, do you know what the consequences will be? Di Wei descended, completely covering the black robe. Under the imperial prestige, a large amount of dark purple mist overflowed from under the black robe and quickly dissipated. Seeing this kind of energy that is not Yanli but equally tyrannical, Zhen Weiyang waved his hand to pick up a ray of dark purple huang. Such a tiny strand of dark purple huameng pulsated in his palm, and it lasted for a long time, but it seemed to be extremely repulsive and eventually dissipated. Zhen Weiyang closed his emperor's eyes tightly and seemed to feel the source of this light. The Xiao Yuntai was extremely silent, and no one dared to speak. And at this time, Yu Chang looked at Jian Wushuang with a smile, and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Little friend Jian, you are in trouble this time." Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. I never thought of this kind of result. It's okay, the emperor will have a way. Yu Chang said with a smile, Little friend, what adventure do you have when you go this time? He was startled slightly and then said, No, all that is left is the thrilling, and Chi-Yu has never met before. When Yu Chang heard the words, he nodded and said no more. Jian Wushuang secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time faintly confused. Could it be discovered so soon? He quickly suppressed this idea again. The Boyang vase was the product of the emperor and the sheep. It could hide the heavens, but how could it not hide a pinnacle great emperor? Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes and secretly became anxious. No, it's okay, they won't fight, right? For a long time, the Poyang bottle has served as his pocket of treasures. No matter what the treasures he has obtained, it is stuffed into the Poyang bottle together with his whole cards. And the dark blue diamond crystal that stored the black robe old man was also easily stuffed into the Bo-Yang bottle by him. As the sword spirit in Yu Chang's emperor sword, the black robe old man must have participated in battles after another. In other words, the heavenly court where the three emperors were destroyed is very likely to have Yu Chang's participation. This is a blood feud that cannot be reconciled, and there is absolutely no possibility of reconciliation. If you really fight in the Boyang vase, the three emperors who have only the true soul will definitely fall behind, and may even be defeated. Regardless of the situation, this was something Jian Wushuang didn't want to see. However, with two real emperors around him, Jian Wushuang couldn't open the Bo-Yang bottle to check it, so he could only secretly worry. At this moment, Zhen Weiyang opened his eyes, and a touch of golden light appeared in the emperor's eyes. He seemed to have realized something, frowned again. After a while, Zhen Weiyang said, "You don't belong to the big division domain, or even this era. Who are you?" In a word, even Yu Chang was solemn. The weight of this sentence is really too heavy and contains too much content. From that long time to the barren Wangu era, and swept through the heavens of Zhenwuyang, if you don't know the meaning of this sentence. The Wangu era is an era that I can't even imagine. There is even an era that is even more distant than the Wangu era? And the black robe at the moment has actually existed since a more ancient time? Only then did Jian Wushuang discover that he had far underestimated the existence of the sky character bone armor, and at the same time he was filled with an unspeakable emotion. Has the news of Master Xuanyi become secret in an era where even time and years have no meaning? Who is he? What did you do that fell to where it is now? Jian Wushuang was shocked in his heart, and at the same time looked solemnly at the black robe, eager to learn some news from him. However, under the suppression of the emperor's luck, the black robe was on the verge of extinction again. You don't belong to this era. Who are you? Zhen Weiyang took the trouble to repeat this question again. The black robe, who had been silent for a long time, raised his head at this moment, and shot two dark purple cold glows from under the wide hood. That was his gaze, looking at Zhen Weiyang. Then the old hoarse voice sounded again, peeping at the ciphertext, "Die." Except for this sentence, don't you have anything else? Zhen Weiyang frowned. If you are willing to say it, I will let you go once, so that you no longer suffer, and let you go. Chapter 5099. Immediately afterwards, he changed his head again. If you still don't say anything, I have many ways to make you more painful than staying in that little bone armor 1,000 times, 10,000 times. However, Hypo turned a deaf ear to what he said, still stubbornly repeating the sentence, "The one who looks at the ciphertext, die." Zhen Weiyang was angry and directly waved his arms. In an instant, the chains condensed by the emperor's luck lashed against the black robe fiercely. With a whip, the whole body of the black robe instantly cracked a hideous crack. Then, the 9 chains fell down together. The dark purple huameng that was enough to cover the sky was disintegrating, and the body of the black robe disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. If you don't say it will not do you any good, if you say it, it will feel better. Zhen Weiyang said slowly. Even at the edge of life and death, the black robe still repeated the previous sentence. The one who looks at the ciphertext, die. Death. Zhen Weiyang sipped, and a total of 9 chains fell together. It is foreseeable that once all the chains are dropped, the black robe will inevitably disappear. Jian Wushuang's heart was stunned, and he wanted to save the black robe. But Yu Chang took a step ahead of him. He waved his hand to stop the 9 Dao Monarch Qi luck chain and stood in front of Zhen Weiyang. "Yu Chang, what are you?" Zhen Weiyang frowned in confusion. Yu Chang arched his hands and said, "Going back to the emperor, he can't die. This involves a lot of things. If you act rashly, it might be detrimental to many things." Zhen Weiyang frowned, thinking about the meaning of his words, and then said after a moment, "It's okay, imprison him." When Yu Chang heard the words, he nodded, then turned to look at the black robe, stretched out his hand and stroked it. Layers of black and blue aura appeared. Then he was wrapped in a black robe and put it back into his sleeve. As the black robe disappeared, the unspeakable depressive breath disappeared completely. The entire Zhaoyantai was restored to the state of Yanzhu and Yanshu. He didn't get any useful news from Hypo's mouth, which made Zhen Weiyang quite upset. He turned to look at Jian Wushuang. Only resentment was left in the emperor's eyes. Then what ciphertext is hidden in the bone armor of Rosh, so that you can't even ask the news? Nothing, mainly because when we were about to see the answer, the black robe rushed out and destroyed the bone armor. Zhen Weiyang's voice rose sharply. That is to say, after having tossed for so long and ruined me half of the sky, I finally got nothing? Jian Wushuang was quite embarrassed. You can say so. Zhen Weiyang was extremely angry and turned his head to look at the craftsman Su Tua. Su Tua, this emperor must listen to the truth. What is the ciphertext on the bone armor? The craftsman Su Tua slowly opened his eyes, Hui Dijuan indeed, as the little friend Jian said, Su Tuo doesn't even know it. When Zhen Weiyang heard this, he felt nothing to say. At this time, Yu Chang said, every dust in this big division, every celestial plane has gone through countless catastrophes to form the current prosperity. And the significance of the existence of the heaven is to protect the countless horizons of heaven and eternal prosperity, and protect the countless heavenly arrogances toward their own avenue. However, this unnecessary battle has turned nearly 100 heavenly planes and endless creatures into dust, and everything in it may be destroyed. This is beyond what the heavenly court can tolerate. The last Dayan immortal who erased nearly 10 celestial planes has been imprisoned in the sea of boundlessness and endured endless nothingness. Now, your damage to Tianyu far exceeds that of any previous war, and punishment is inevitable. After the sentence was pronounced, Yu Chang looked at Zhen Weiyang. At this moment, the disciples of Sansuan Mountain, the master craftsmen Su Tuo, Nen Xian, and young Master Jiao all looked extremely nervous. In the sea of no edge, the punishment of the emperor is the most serious punishment. Once these responsibilities fall, it is almost equivalent to a death sentence. At this time, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said, "This battle was caused by me alone. They are all victims. It has nothing to do with them. I will bear it myself." "Who said they should be punished?" Zhen Weiyang looked at him and said in a deep voice, "This emperor will only fine you today, heavy punishment." "Willing to take it?" Jian Wushuang arched his hands and said firmly. Zhen Weiyang said in a deep voice, "You said, what kind of punishment do you want?" "Any punishment is fine." "Okay, happy boy. The emperor will punish you to go to the wasteland to move bricks." Move bricks." Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded. "Yes. Let me go to De Huang and stay honestly for 10,000 years. 1,000 years. The blazing and warm Yanli disappeared, and the clouds of Yunzhu and Yunshu gradually disappeared, replaced by low black clouds. Thunder and lightning, thick as a dragon, brewed in the dark clouds, and accompanied by a huge vortex, it was a scene of destruction. It was in these void clouds that even Yen Xian dared not wait any longer, and there was a giant bird that spread its wings and jumped. Yu reading www.akanshu.com. This giant bird is completely black and blue, and under its wings, it can even cover several celestial planes under its wings. It is so huge that even the dragon-like lightning in the dark clouds is extremely small. On top of this giant bird's beast, there are two figures sitting upright. One of them is Yu Chang and the other is Jian Wushuang. Even Yanli can swallow the frozen gang wind raging in the void. Even Jian Wushuang felt a deep chill. This is a void that has never been seen before, and the heavenly plane does not exist at all, not even a trace of derivation, and some are only barren in nothingness. This is a very dark void. Even the stars have not been born. Except for the burst of lightning, there is no other color. Sitting on the bird's head of the giant bird, Jian Wushuang no longer knew where he was. The giant bird can span hundreds of celestial planes between the wings, and it can be inferred that it has been completely far away from the center of the big division. Could it be that the so-called Great Desolation is the border of Desiyu? Jian Wushuang trembled in his heart, as he thought. At this moment, Yu Chang suddenly looked back and looked at him with a warm complexion. "That's a good guess. The so-called De Huang is indeed the border of Desiyu." Jian Wushuang felt a shock in his heart. "How do you know what I think in my heart?" Yu Chang smiled slightly. "Of course it is a guess. If you are not thinking about this problem, it would be strange." Jian Wushuang was silent. He didn't understand why these emperors could always see what other Yanxian was thinking. After a while, Yu Chang spoke first. "We are now far away from the center of Desiyu and rushed to the border." He was a little stunned when he heard the words. It took 20,000 years to unknowingly it has been nearly 20,000 years since the divine power universe. And for nearly 20,000 years he has been surrounding Desiyu. Chapter 5100. The vast expanse, including countless celestial planes of the Great Division, even began to make Jian Wushuang doubts. Desiyu, is there really a boundary? Now that he got the exact news from Yu Chang, This made Jian Wushuang feel slightly worried. It's just that Desiyu is so vast and vast, so in what way should the real ultimate development be displayed before his eyes? And Xian Yi, Lao Zun and the others, where and in what form should exist in this ultimate development? Just when Jian Wushuang was a little startled, Yu Chang said leisurely, "You have also seen that not all celestial voids can be born out of planes. The more you reach the boundary, the less planes there will be. And the boundary of the big division domain is the limit that the Emperor can expand to, and there is no power here, and it is meaningless to continue to expand. Therefore, we set the boundary of the Great Division as the Great Wilderness." A brief language sketched out the outline of Desiyu for Jian Wushuang, let him know something. Then he got up, faced the wind that was enough to make the fairy body tremble, and looked at the endless nothingness through the layers of dark clouds. Outside of the big division domain, is it even more expansive? It may disappoint you. Outside the Great Division, there is an endless wilderness. Even Dian Immortal will be lost in the wilderness and eventually become dust. Jian Wushuang couldn't believe it. Could it be that there is only an endless great famine outside the Desiyu? Of course not, Yu Chang smiled. Although the great wilderness is endless, it has a boundary after all. Beyond that boundary, there are many large domains that are the same as those of the Great Division. Jian Wushuang's heart was hot, and his silent heart felt a little restless. With infinite existence, there are infinite possibilities. Everything is within reach. At this moment, what did he think of, and look towards Yu Changdao? "Uncle Yu, I can ask, what is the name of the nearest big domain next to the big division domain?" Yu Chang looked at him and said with a smile, "Ask what this does. Do you want to leave Desiyu?" "No? I'm just curious to ask." This is not something that can't be said, but the Yenxian known in Desiyu is indeed poorly understood. The big domain adjacent to the big division domain? It is the infinite border of the great wilderness, and that big domain is called the Tongtian Buddha realm. Jian Wushuang was taken aback. "Through the heavens. Why, do you know there?" "No? I don't know, I just think it's a bit novel." Yu Chang looked ahead. It seemed to be reminiscing, "Where? I wondered once. All the monk capitals are more stubborn and extreme. They gave me some not-so-good perceptions. It's a coincidence. The neighboring Desiyu is actually the world of Tongtian Buddha?" Jian Wushuang was shocked secretly. The experience of the past reappeared in his mind. Although he had never been to the so-called Tongtian Buddha realm, the Tongtian Buddha realm had some contact with him unconsciously. In the Sand Demon Cave, encountering a sea of blood, the cause and effect are killed off. Sha Qing, the lord of the Sand Demon Cave, surrendered to his death, saying that the only way to resolve the catastrophe was to go to the world of Tongtian Buddha. Only then did Jian Wushuang have some connection with the Buddha realm, that Tongtian. Now that 20,000 years have passed, the Tongtian Buddha realm, which is about to be sealed in memory, has once again come to mind. After all, do you want to go to the world of Tongtian Buddha? Jian Wushuang hesitated in his heart, and at the same time worried about the causal massacre he was carrying. The so-called cause and effect massacre is a crack. Although it is not too harmful, it is a hidden danger after all. This hidden danger will continue to grow with the owner, and eventually reach the point where it cannot be ignored. At present, Jian Wushuang has nothing to do with this big killing, but he knows that if it is not cleared in time, his mellow spirit will be completely destroyed. So he can't ignore any clues about the world of Tongtian Buddha. Because of a woman, a large-scale killing and robbery made Jian Wushuang and Tongtian Buddha realm contact. Of course, these are things that Yu Chang didn't know, and naturally he wouldn't think about it. Yu Chang continued to speak. "So, I don't have a good understanding of the world of Tongtian Buddhism, including emperors who are more repulsive there." When he said this, he looked at Jian Wushuang and continued, "So what you have to do when you come to this border wasteland is to move bricks and move bricks hard." No, isn't it really moving bricks? There can be fakes, the emperor has no jokes. I don't know how long it has passed, how long it has transitioned into the void, and even the years have no meaning, until Jian Wushuang is numb, everything has new progress. Ahead is the great wilderness. Yu Chang said. Jian Wushuang's heart shook, then he got up and looked forward. He saw that the originally extremely dark void had a dim light and a solid earth. Wait, the earth? How can there be a solid ground in this vast wilderness that is so barren that even dust can't exist? However, Jian Wushuang was truly convinced when the giant bird below him steadily landed on the solid ground. Here, the boundary of Desiyu, which belongs to the void of the great wilderness, actually exists in the form of the earth. The earth is boundless, extending to every emptiness in sight. The giant bird standing steadily on the earth raised its head and sighed, then turned into a palm-sized chasing bird and flew into Yu Chang's palm and disappeared. No, not land. The sword with the soles of the feet on the ground did not change slightly in both sides, and soon I noticed that the ground under my feet was not the real ground, but was composed of dense bones. Yu Chang glanced at him quite appreciatively and then said, "Yes, there is really no land on this wild border. This solid ground is actually paved by the bones of Dingxiu, Xianxian, and Dianxian. Are these all the bones of the cultivators and immortal Yen in the Great Division?" Jian Wushuang's eyes were solemn. There are too many to an unimaginable level. How many bones of monks and immortals are needed to cover the vast wilderness and emptiness? Yu Chang nodded, as if narrating a small matter. It is indeed all the bones of the monks in the Great Division and the bones of the Yanxian, of which the bones of the Yanxian accounted for 70%. Jian Wushuang was shocked and completely covered the border of this great wilderness. What kind of battle he had experienced in the age of Wangu? Does the establishment of a heavenly court require so many killings to become immortal? He also understood a little bit why there are so few fairy cultivators in Desiyu nowadays, and Dian Celestial being almost non-existent. Multi-source app, Mimi reading the reason may be traced back to the Battle of the Emperors in the Ancient Age. Please remember the domain name of the book's first publication. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 5101. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. It has been nearly 20,000 years since he reached the ultimate Yanhuan, and in the 20,000 years, Jian Wushuang also knew a lot about those ancient secrets that were unknown to Dian Immortal. The Wangu era belonged to the era of coexistence of all emperors, and countless stunning arrogances came into being, creating their own supreme road. Just what Jian Wushuang knew, there were 5 emperors. The 5 emperors are the 5 heavenly courts, coexisting in the Big Division domain, dividing domains to rule. Yangjun, Suhe, Daogong, Fenghua, Lu Crou. And these 5 emperors can be regarded as representatives in the Big Division, and there are several emperors. The Wangu era was a brilliant world, with so many emperors, let alone Dianxian. However, with the emergence of Zhen Wuyang, everything eventually turned into dust. Just what Jian Wushuang knew, nearly 10 emperors died in Zhen Wuyang's hands. And Yanxian, Dianxian seems to be countless. He also understood why there were very few bones of Xianxian left in the Desai domain. It turned out that all the bones were pushed into the wilderness to fill the border of the wilderness. This is a dusty secret, whether it is known or not, it has not much meaning. Stepping on the ground paved with the infinite bones of Yanxian, Jian Wushuang walked slowly along with Yu Chang. The great wasteland is endless, and the bones under this foot are also endless. The Emperor is now punishing you to the great wasteland. It is really helpless, otherwise it will not be enough to warn or convince the crowd. Furthermore, the Emperor asked you to come to this great wilderness, which is also the result of our joint discussions. There are 2 reasons for this. One is to warn the public, and the other is that this great wasteland really needs to be repaired. Repair? Jian Wushuang looked at him, a little puzzled. Yu Chang nodded. It's true, this vast wasteland, it's time to fix it. Jian Wushuang felt a little uncomprehending. Could it be that there will be an immortal existence in this place where even the power of extension can't exist? It is indeed impossible for Yanxian to come here. Even Dianxian will never set foot in this great famine, but there are always exceptions in everything. As Yu Chang said, he waved his arms, and suddenly mad dust was rolled up on this fairy bone road. With the sudden rise of Quangchen, some subtle auras began to appear on the Xingu road. Jian Wushuang subconsciously looked at the immortal bone road under his feet, only to realize that a pair of footprints appeared. What are these footprints? It's trouble. Yu Chang smiled slightly and said, apart from those monk heads, you are the first Yenxian to come to the great wilderness. Those monk heads? Why did they appear in the great wilderness? Jian Wushuang couldn't believe it. Yu Chang said, they used their feet to measure the earth, and they tried to save all the eternal immortals, and went to their heavenly Buddha realm to worship. The most important point is that they regard this great wilderness as a place of experience, and they will come forward one after another. Jian Wushuang was a little dumb when he heard the words. The idea is really unique, so you should use it as a place of experience? Yanli cannot be retained at all, and it is boundless. I am afraid that even Dianxian will be lost here. It is more appropriate to compare this great wilderness to a tomb. Yes, even I never thought that they would have such a firm determination. Yu Chang said, and then looked at him. Wushuang, all you have to do is to stay here and reinforce the barriers of the great wilderness. Stay here for 10,000 years? Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. 10,000 years is a period of retreat for the immortals and even the top cultivators, not long at all. But for Jian Wushuang, it was different. His growth rate was too fast, and 10,000 years was enough for him to do too many things. Right now, he was going to be exiled in the wilderness for 10,000 years, which greatly restricted any of his actions. Yu Chang seemed to see the sadness in his eyes and smiled. 10,000 years is not a long time, but it is just a rhetoric. If the emperor didn't say that at the time, I am afraid that the second emperor would never let it go. After all, it was destroyed. It's his greatness. In 1,000 years, I will come to Dahuang to pick you up, but of course it depends on your performance. Jian Wushuang secretly breathed a sigh of relief. 1,000 years of time is not too far away for him. Quandang has experienced this great wilderness. Yes, what do I do next in this great famine? Of course it is building the wall to reinforce the barrier. Ah, it turned out to be really moving bricks? Of course. As they continued to talk, the two figures moved forward at a gentle speed, until a wall that almost halved the void appeared before they stopped. It's not so much a wall, it's a real fairy trail. It is as if the road to the bones of the bones is rolled up by some supreme power. It rises high, almost isolating the entire void, and it is divided into two even if it is Dian. Standing here is like the supreme under the fairy trail-like barriers. Everyone will feel their own insignificance. Here is the real border of Desiu, and it is also the edge of the great wasteland. Yu Chang looked at Jian Wushuang, who was already fascinated, and said in a slow voice, and what you have to do now is to repair this border barrier a little bit. Xiao, repair here? Jian Wushuang swallowed his throat with some difficulty, and bitterness flashed in his eyes. Yu Chang nodded slightly. This border barrier was built by me and the emperor. It can stop all enemies and will not be destroyed for endless years. However, on the other side of the great wilderness, those monk heads from the world of Tongtian Buddhism used certain methods to damage the border barrier, allowing them to enter the Great Division. What you have to do now, Wushuang, is to completely seal the border barriers and block all enemies from the wilderness. Jian Wushuang nodded. Okay, I will. At this time, Yu Chang put a smile away and became a little serious. Remember, Wushuang, this is a punishment. This is the most dangerous place in the entire Desai region. Even Dian Immortal is nothing here. At the moment you set foot on the border of the wilderness, you have to make any preparations. You are not only facing the weakness of the immortal body, but also the enemies hidden in the wilderness. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed slightly. Enemies in the great wilderness. There are other immortals in the great wilderness. Yu Chang nodded. To be precise, they are no longer evangelists. They are just a certain obsession, wandering and lost in the wilderness. After I leave, any evangelists and monk heads that come out of the great wilderness will be your enemies. All you have to do is to completely block all enemies outside the border, and don't miss one. Chapter 5102. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign Yu Chang left. After entrusting Jian Wushuang for a while, he left. Only Jian Wushuang was left on this fairy bone road, the border of the great wilderness. He stood in place, feeling the endless aura of ancient times, and at the same time thinking about the meaning of Yu Chang's words. In this great wilderness, can there be a fairy cultivating approach and walking in it? And what kind of existence is the so-called Tongtian Buddha realm outside the great wilderness? And those guys actually use the end of the great wasteland as part of their own trials? Jian Wushuang thought of the great monks he had seen in the Sand Demon Cave, and he also got some news from the discussion forum with Konglun. The heads of monks who haunt the Sand Demon Cave are indeed from the world of Tongtian Buddha. Moreover, after experiencing the incident in the Sand Demon Cave, Jian Wushuang had no favors with the monk heads, especially the few Dayan immortals. But only the monk Konglun, Jian Wushuang had some feelings for him. He gained a lot from the conversation under the Blood Sea. All in all, in the world of Tongtian Buddhism outside of the Great Wilderness, Jian Wushuang didn't have much favor. After roughly clarifying some clues to the conclusion, Jian Wushuang began to walk forward. The boundless wilderness, without borders, everything seems to be shrouded in dense dust, without a heavenly plane, without a big sun star. Yes, it's just dim and gloomy. What Yu Chang said was right, even if Dayan Immortal came here, he would eventually be lost. But Jian Wushuang did not have anything unusual. His mind, spirit and thoughts had long been melded to a terrifying degree. For him, Da Huang was actually a good place for cultivation. Stepping on the Xingu Road, Jian Wushuang looked at the boundary barrier that divided the void in two, and quickly understood what Yu Chang wanted him to repair. In the center of this vast border barrier, there is a gap, only a line. It's like being torn apart by external force, making the boundary barrier no longer complete. This gap seemed to have only one line, but when Jian Wushuang really went to check the gap, he knew what the abyss was. The entire boundary barrier is too vast and infinite, so even if only one line is broken, it is an irreparable crack. Jian Wushuang stood in the center of this crack, unavoidably getting big for a while. This rift is too vast. I am afraid that it may not be able to completely fill it if it is packed into thousands of celestial planes. Today's Jian Wushuang, it is not difficult to move an ordinary heavenly plane in the Desai domain. But the difficulty lies in the fact that this is a great wasteland, and everything is barren. There is no celestial plane, and there is no growth force to supplement, only rely on oneself to slowly restore the growth force. In this way, repairing this border barrier is tantamount to a disaster. Since there was no Tianyu plane to use, Jian Wushuang turned to look at the Xingu Road under his feet. This boundary barrier, like the Xingu Road, was built with the bones of Yanxian, but if you want to repair it, you can only fill it with the Xingu Road. Do what he said. After Jian Wushuang roughly calculated the gap between the cracks in the boundary barrier, he suddenly released his own power. This great famine, I don't know how many billions of years of time there has been no development. Therefore, when Jian Wushuang released his power, the entire endless void and Da Huang directly burst into vortexes. The thick dust was absorbed by the vortex, but hovering in the void, making everything tremble. Thunder and lightning that is as thick as a dragon looms in the eddy current, and may tear the void and fall at any time. Here, there is no heavenly order, everything is chaotic, the original state. Then, in the next section, thousands of thunder and lightning that resembled a giant dragon, all blasted towards Jian Wushuang who exuded power. Boom! Even the Xingu Road trembled, and the fragments of the fairy bones became a fan. As for Jian Wushuang, who resisted the sky thunder with his body, he was severely blasted into the heart of the earth. These heavenly thunders could not have much influence on Jian Wushuang, who possessed the immortal body, but they still made him embarrassed to the extreme. When the thunder and lightning subsided, he walked out of the heart of the earth quite embarrassed. No, don't you have to be hacked even to release Yanli? Jian Wushuang was a little puzzled. He decided to try again. The majestic and surging force once again flowed in the meridians and escaped. But this time, it did not trigger the void vision. Jian Wushuang quickly understood that the original vision was caused by an accident. However, in this great wasteland, it is indeed impossible to condense and derive power, and it is a completely barren land. After thinking about it, Jian Wushuang directly set about repairing the boundary barrier. Since the heavenly plane was not born in this great wilderness, he could only start to cut off the road of immortal bones and use the piled bones to fill the gaps between the boundary barriers. The invisible sword quietly condenses Jian Wushuang rises into the void, and then cuts it down with a single sword. Rumble! Xiangulu was cut open by a crack, and then under the cutting of the invisible sword, a square trace was cut out at the center of Xiangulu. Then, Jian Wushuang put away the invisible sword, and his figure also fell on the road of Xianbone. He suddenly stomped his foot, and in an instant, the Xingu road was sinking and shaking, and a square road block the size of a sacred mountain rose directly from the ground. Jian Wushuang's arms were supporting the sky, and he directly held up the road block the size of a sacred mountain, stacked in the center of the boundary barrier. Although the road block is bigger than the sacred mountain, it is as small as dust when compared with the cracks in the boundary. But Jian Wushuang didn't care about these, silently began to carry out the next move. In this way, in this vast wilderness, a figure tirelessly cuts the road of immortal bones, and at the same time piles the cut road blocks the size of a mountain in the gap between the boundary barriers. In the border wilderness, there is no concept of time, everything is in a primitive state of chaos. An immortal with a weak mind and spirit will be lost in this. There is only one figure, doing his own thing firmly, constantly mending the gaps in the boundary. My big companion, where do you think Wushuang will be now? I heard that Demaxian has been seriously damaged? The cloud smoke curls up, and the heavenly palace lies quietly among the clouds, which is quite mysterious. In a warm pavilion, Xiao Dijuan leaned against the window, looking at the swimming sea of clouds with some wonder. The purple-robed old man who had been standing behind him looked up at him and said, "Your Highness, you have already passed." Xiao Dijuan returned to his senses, looked at him sideways and said in a condensed voice, "Why can't I even say this now?" Chapter 5103. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. The thin purple robe bowed his head and nodded, and said in a steady voice, "His Royal Highness is the prince, and these should not be issues that the prince should consider." Xiadijan's voice rose sharply, "Then what should I consider? Should the emperors kill each other?" He was silent and said after a moment, "I can't influence His Highness' judgment, but His Highness should be considered for the future." "Okay, I see." Xiadijan was rather impatient, and a lonely flash in his eyes. The thin purple robe continued, "His Royal Highness, don't rely too much on Jian Wushuang. You must know that he is not dependent on His Highness. He has his own purpose. I don't think he will be restrained by any immortal. Once he finds his own way, it's not far from leaving." Xiadijan couldn't bear it. "Enough, go out." But he did not leave and continued to say, "In order to prevent your Highness from going on like this, I have already met the Emperor and asked the Emperor to send a great heaven official for His Highness, and he will be able to come soon." Boom! Xian Chuang was directly shot to pieces by Xiao Dijuan. He stood in the warm pavilion, angrily to the extreme. "What are you talking about? Let the Emperor send me a great heaven official? You don't know my heaven official is Jian Wushuang?" The thin purple robe looked calm. Jian Wushuang doesn't want to be a heavenly official of His Highness, and he is not moistened by the blood of the Emperor, so he is not a heavenly official of His Highness. Okay, if you have you, then I have to take a good look. How long does that great faculty live under me? After leaving these last words, Xiao Dijuan left Nwan Pavilion straight away. The thin purple robe slowly turned around, a touch of firmness flashed in his eyes. In the endless wilderness, under the borderless barriers. At this moment, in the gap like the abyss of the sky, there are millions of square roadblocks like sacred mountains. Each roadblock is comparable to a sacred mountain, and millions of sacred mountains are stacked on top of each other, and it has long been impossible to imagine its grandeur. But in this way, compared with the border barriers, they are as small as dust. In the center of the crack in the boundary barrier, On top of 1,000,000 sacred mountain-like fairy bones, sat a free and easy figure. He is Jian Wushuang. In a very short period of time, the boundary crack was filled with an edge. Although it is not a big deal, it is quite good. Looking at the still unimaginable cracks, Jian Wushuang was already thinking about how to plug the cracks the fastest. If the Xingu road was cut out like a sacred mountain to fill it up as it is now, I am afraid that it would not be possible to plug the boundary cracks in 1,000 years. What should I do to quickly repair the cracks? Or should I try to push with Wushuang Kendo? Jian Wushuang thought to himself, but soon all his ideas were rejected by him. In this great wasteland, there can be no generative power born at all, and this means that he can't draw generative power from the void. However, Wushuang's sword Dao is extremely depleted of power. Once the immortal Bodhi's recovery cannot make up for the loss, then he will be extremely passive. Jian Wushuang would never do such a risky move. What's more, here is the border of the wilderness full of unknown desolation. No one knows what exactly exists here, not to mention that beyond this border barrier, there is an even more endless and dangerous famine. So Jian Wushuang still acted honestly according to the previous method. With a sword down, thousands of sword intents surged, and then every sword intent seemed to give birth to spiritual wisdom, spontaneously cutting the fairy bone road at the fastest speed. Then Jian Wushuang shook the ground and piled the road blocks into the cracks in the road boundary. I am afraid that even he himself had never thought that Wushuang Kendo would be used to do these things one day. The sacred mountain-like road blocks are piled up in the boundary cracks, and the sacred mountain-like road blocks are actually the corpses of a fairy. Countless bones of Yanxian finally lay in the great wilderness, becoming a part of the ancient barren. Jian Wushuang also finally understood that Mingming Xianxian had already transcended the order of heaven and became an immortal existence. Why is there so sparse Xianxian in Desiyu? It turns out that those Xianxian from the ancient times have long been turned into dead bones and discarded in the wilderness. And it was extremely boring to repair the border in this great wilderness. Originally Jian Wushuang thought that he would encounter injustice, but never thought that this great wilderness would not even have any fluctuations. If nothing happens, he will not encounter a catastrophe in just 1,000 years. And when Jian Wushuang repeatedly moved the bricks, something unexpected happened suddenly. Under the fairy bone road that has been dug deep gully, the pure Wushuang sword intent is even harder to dig down, as if it has touched some restrictions, so it is difficult to make an inch. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly, with a bad premonition in his heart. He knows the point where Wushuang Kendo's sword intent is tyrannical, and it is precisely because of that bad premonition will grow stronger. Could it be that there is hidden under this fairy bone road what? Jian Wushuang quickly walked down from the void and came to the edge of the pothole dug out of deep gully. Through the layers of celestial bones, his eyes turned to the deepest part of the pit. But at the same time, a thick black smoke that could not be ignored was like a black dragon, suddenly gushing out from the deepest part of the pothole. Even Jian Wushuang couldn't ignore this kind of energy that burst out in an instant. The black smoke gushes out, covering the sky instantly, making the void even more extremely dark. Due to the surging and rising of black smoke, a vortex once again appeared above the void. The more violent vortex was spinning, echoing with the black smoke, and it seemed that a supreme punishment was brewing. Jian Wushuang secretly said a bad sound. Without thinking about it, he directly released the invisible sword and slashed towards the black smoke pillar like a black dragon. Sneer. Like tearing brocade and silk, the black smoke was cut off from it forcibly and finally dissipated in the void. But Jian Wushuang did not relax his vigilance. He did not think that the black smoke would disappear like this. What is it that emits black smoke? Is it some kind of prohibition? You know, this fairy bone road in the great wilderness was formed by Zhen Wuyang and Yu Chang hand in hand in that ancient time, and its span of time is unimaginable. If there is a certain restriction under this fairy bone road, I am afraid that once it is born, it will inevitably cause some kind of catastrophe on this fairy bone road. Jian Wushuang frowned. He never thought that digging a road would actually dig a catastrophe. Immediately afterwards, the black smoke that was cut off unexpectedly spewed out again, and with an unimaginable aura, covered the entire Fairy Bone Road. This must be a disaster. Chapter 5104. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. As if to confirm the anxiety in Jian Wushuang's heart, Xiangulu suddenly trembled. Along with this tremor, a voice that seemed to have come from the Wanggu era resounded with a sense of decay. A line of shouting and killing came from under the Xingu Road, causing the entire Xingu Road to start to turbulence. Jian Wushuang's gaze was completely solemn, and he could feel the terrifying existence under the heart of this earth. Accompanied by the sound of shouting and killing, it shook the void, as if countless immortals were fighting on the battlefield in a battle, draining the last drop of blood. The entire border wilderness seemed to have been transformed into a battlefield, returning to the ancient time. The fairy bone road under the feet was trembling, as if these fairy bones would wake up at any time, and everything was shocked beyond words. At the next moment, under the abyss, the black smoke suddenly became stronger than at any time before, almost reaching the level of obscuring the void. Jian Wushuang stepped back slowly, frowning tightly. This kind of supreme aura is definitely beyond the reach of ordinary Yanxian. There must be a catastrophe on this fairy bone road. It seemed that just as he thought, in the black smoke that was enough to obscure the void, a pair of true eyes like the stars of the sun appeared quietly. Dark smoke, real eyes suddenly appeared. With the appearance of this dual true purpose, Jian Wushuang immediately noticed it. With eyes facing each other, thousands of black mist like arrows burst out of the black smoke. Jian Wushuang was startled secretly, and almost retreated 100 steps before he even thought of it. At the same time, holding an invisible sword, he slashed the black mist arrows from the violent shooting. "I'm still alive. I'm still alive." Amidst the black smoke, a rotten and barren voice came out, as if the pain that had suppressed the endless years was released. "Zhenwuyang, I'm still alive, I'm still alive." The black smoke trembled violently, and the bones on the uppermost layer of Xingu Road began to shatter into dust. Jian Wushuang stepped back slowly, and he already felt a desolate and lonely breath from the black smoke, plus what he said. It can be concluded that it is living with Zhenwuyang for an era. And those who live with Zhenwuyang for an era and can call Zhenwuyang directly can only be hostile forces. Who can run through the long river of time and is still undead? Who is not the strongest? After thinking about these things clearly, Jian Wushuang did not hesitate to prepare to retreat to the border of the great wilderness. After all, once Yanli was consumed here, he would truly die. However, before he started, the black smoke covering the void suddenly gathered, turned into a heavy hammer enough to cover the sky, and hit Jian Wushuang heavily. He was shocked, naturally feeling the terrible power of this kind of power, and hurriedly avoided. Boom! The heavy hammer condensed from the black mist hit the Xingu Road heavily, causing a huge shock. Those immortal bones that have existed for hundreds of millions of years without decay simply cannot withstand such a heavy pressure, and are instantly blasted out of the potholes of one party after another. And Jian Wushuang didn't love war at all, and quickly left Xingu Road with the gods and the mountains and rivers. But Xingu Road is too vast, almost as endless as the great wilderness. With his departure, the heavy hammer condensed by black smoke changed again, turned into hundreds of chains, and shot down frantically. Ching, ching. Every chain made of black smoke can easily break a fairy bone road. However, Jian Wushuang, who used Shudi Mountain and River to escape, was unable to pull the distance, and chains descending from the sky blocked any possible escape directions. He frowned, and the invisible sword was quietly held in his hand, directly bursting out thousands of sword intent. Every sword intent exploded with unparalleled momentum, slashing towards the chains. When the two collided, light and darkness existed for only a moment, and then all disappeared. Jian Wushuang no longer rushed to escape, but turned and looked towards the void. In the void, the monstrous black smoke has gathered together, swimming slowly. As the black smoke continued to dissipate, a pair of true eyes hidden in it finally fully condensed. It was a body that was 10 million feet tall. Even though it was hidden under the black smoke, it was difficult to conceal the magnificence of the figure. The mottled and gloomy beetle was broken, and it was not even visible that it was a battle armor, because it was so broken that it could not cover the body that was as high as 10,000 meters. As the black smoke dissipated, the body that was as high as 10 million feet stood on the road of Shengu. He wore a shattered armor, big ears, disheveled hair, and a pair of true eyes that were made of divine blood, exploding with supreme power. In his hand, he held a broken sword that had been broken in half. Along with his appearance, a violent vortex reappeared above the void, and lightning like a dragon descended from the vortex, wrapping around the body of the battle armor. If I am still alive, I will not live in vain. I will destroy everything and bury it for my lord. The battle armor figure roars with a sword, and a pair of true eyes are eager to drip blood. He has been dead for countless years, but he woke up again, waking up in the great wilderness, www. Novel. Everything that he was familiar with has turned into dry bones, and everything he sees is barren. And the first time he woke up, there was only Jian Wushuang around him, and he naturally regarded Jian Wushuang as an enemy. The eagle dog under the true Wuyang seat? The armor body exclaimed, and his hand cut the sword and pointed it straight down. Jian Wushuang took a half step back, his eyes solemnly said, I have nothing to do with Zhen Wuyang, you admit it wrong. I will never admit my mistake. I can feel his breath in your body. You must be inextricably linked to Zhen Wuyang. The armor roared, since I am alive, then Zhen Wuyang's I will destroy everything. Jian Wushuang heard a bad cry secretly, and then exploded the power of the fairy body to its peak without any hesitation. Boom, boom, boom. The supreme generative power broke out in this great wilderness where the generative power could not be born, unexpectedly once again aroused the void vision. The vortexes are converging, and a breath of depressive silence is engulfed. The battle armor figure stood on the road of Shengu, and the body was as high as tens of thousands of feet full of coercion that could not be seen directly. Then, holding a broken sword in his hand, Shen cut down to Jian Wushuang. Void couldn't withstand the sword, so it began to fall apart with unparalleled weight. Jian Wushuang's eyes were dignified, and he suddenly stomped Xian Bone Road under his feet. With him as the center, 1,000,000 swords intent rose up instantly at this moment. Purely, the sword intent surrounding the scarlet gold pattern illuminates the void. Wushuang Kendo and Kenjian collided heavily, directly erupting an infinite sound wave. Xiangu Road was even opened up layers of corpses, shattered into powder in the void. And Jian Wushuang piled up in the boundary cracks, those road blocks that looked like sacred mountains, all turned into a handful of flying ash. Chapter 5105. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. In other words, everything Jian Wushuang did before was in vain under this first confrontation. A remnant sword was cut down, and even the sword intent of Wushuang Kendo began to quickly collapse. Million Dao Wushuang sword intent can only look at the broken sword that resisted this cut. This battle armor figure with an ancient, desolate, and lonely aura is really terrifying, just the drop of this sword, all with the aura of the ancient tyrant. Million Dao Wushuang sword intent also suddenly turned into a fan. The remnant sword fell unabated, and directly tore out a crack in the Xingu Road. Jian Wushuang quickly backed away, panting slightly. His eyes were completely solemn, and only in this first confrontation he felt the shape of this battle armor. He was a 9-ranked Great Yen Immortal. Regarding rank 9 Dian Immortal, even in the Sea of No Edge, Jian Wushuang had no chance of winning at all. Only when the Emperor's luck is added can he erase the 9-turned Dian Immortal. But how can the Emperor's luck be easily obtained? The Emperor Zhenwu hiding in the ring has disappeared, and the last ray of the true soul of Emperor Six Crows in the text of Emperor Six Crows is also in the deepest sleep. It is impossible to provide the Emperor's luck. And even if it can provide the Emperor's luck, Jian Wushuang today will probably not use it again. Because of the Emperor's luck, the damage from overdraft was too terrible for him who was still a fairy. The immortal body was born from an ultra-perfect chaotic creature, and a physique more profound than an ultra-perfect chaotic creature. And the immortal body will be transformed with Jian Wushuang's growth. But after using the Emperor's luck in the Sea of No Edge, he discovered that the immortal body actually contradicted the foreign Emperor's luck very much, and would be silent because of it. Therefore, Jian Wushuang realized that although his fairy body is like a container, which can accommodate and absorb the luck of the godless king, the damage to the fairy body is also huge. Therefore, Jian Wushuang now can only rely on his own strength to defeat this armored figure. The boundless wilderness, reckless and vast. There will not be any Yanxian, even Dianxian will get involved here. He can only rely on himself. This is the first time Jian Wushuang has faced the 9th rank Dian Immortal, and he is from that ancient time. He has almost no chance of winning, and the possibility of wanting to escape the border of the wilderness is quite low. After all, this great wilderness was too vast. Jian Wushuang didn't think that rank 9 Dian Immortal would not be able to catch up with him. The remnant sword fell without hurting Jian Wushuang any minute, which made the battle armor figure out of surprise. He could naturally see that Jian Wushuang was just a little Yanxian, and because of this, he didn't put it in his eyes. Unexpectedly, Jian Wushuang was unscathed. This made the armor figure instantly angry, and his true eyes were extremely red. If I recover today, all the eagle dogs under the seat of Zhen Wuyang will be buried for my lord. The vortex in the void exploded into an immense momentum, and the thunder and lightning like a giant dragon all penetrated the whole body of the battle armor, making him even more unable to look directly at the extreme. Then, the figure of the battle armor waved the broken sword in his hand and cut down again. This made Jian Wushuang a headache to the extreme, but he could only deal with it. Facing such a huge behemoth, agility became his advantage. When Duanjian cut down again, Jian Wushuang's figure quietly disappeared. When his figure appeared again, he was already at the waist of the battle armor figure. Jian Wushuang shook hands with the extremely dazzling invisible sword, and then stabbed the weakest part of his waist with all his strength. Zheng! There was a sound of golden and iron strikes, and the silver armor on the waist was directly shattered, and the invisible sword surrounded by the Xuanhe pattern only stopped for a moment, and then pierced into the armor-shaped fairy body without any hindrance. Yanli erupted from the wound on his waist, his battle armor figure was dull and roared, and endless violent growth spewed from his waist. Then, the battle armor figure danced his left hand and slammed it to the waist. Jian Wushuang had noticed it early, and his figure was ready to flee. Boom boom boom. The body shape of the battle armor was a dead hand, and he spared no effort to rush to the waist, but Jian Wushuang did not hit it, but hit the invisible sword that was still on the waist. This punch directly embedded the invisible sword deeply into his waist. Ugh! Even if the armor was the 9th rank Dian Immortal, he couldn't bear such pain. The 10,000-meter-long body began to tremble, and then fell backward uncontrollably. Jian Wushuang's eyes condensed, his heart moved, and he silently recited Wushuang's sword art. The invisible sword that had been deeply embedded in the waist of the armor body suddenly exploded with an incomparable Xuanhe pattern at this moment. Unparalleled Kendo, Xinggehohai Jin. River. The river-shaped sword intent is majestic and surging, with the same force as the sky and the earth. At this moment, in the fairy body of the battle armor, it completely exploded. Using the invisible sword as the medium, the brilliant sword intent cannot be looked at directly, and finally converged into Tianhe. Feeling the anomaly in the immortal body, he half-kneeled in the battle armor figure on the path of the immortal bone, roaring dully, raising his palm to draw out the invisible sword in his body. Jian Wushuang was startled, and hurriedly released 1,000,000 chains of Yanli chain around his arm, trying to stop it. However, between Yanxian and 9 ranks Dianxian is an insurmountable abyss. How can it be blocked? This is a collision of physical immortal bodies. The chain of millions of powers was only clamped for a moment, and then instantly torn apart. Divine blood poured out of Jian Wushuang's ears and nose instantly, and the fairy body was hit hard at this moment. However, Wushuang Kendo was also completely released at this moment in the body of the battle armor. The towering Tianhe sword intent broke out completely, and the uncountable sword intent was like a real sword with a handle, rushing and cutting across the fairy body. Even rank 9 Dian Immortal would never be able to bear this kind of pain. The extremely large body of the battle armor instantly sprayed out layers of blood mist, and at the same time, the inexhaustible red-golden sword intent pierced his skin, drilled out of the fairy, and then burst open. He roared in pain, and his huge body crashed onto Xingu Road. It was the road of the bones that was cast from countless mortal bones. They couldn't bear this kind of pressure, and they cracked open the abyss. The immortal body with a 10,000-meter figure finally crashed into the heart of the Xingu Road. Feeling the violent shaking under his feet, Jian Wushuang gave a light cough, then wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth with his hand. It is impossible for him to erase a 9th-rank Great Yanxian with Wushuang's sword Dao. Jian Wushuang didn't believe that the battle armor's figure would die so easily, so he did not relax his vigilance. Chapter 5106. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. Although the armor figure of the 9th-rank Dian Immortal could not die so easily, Wushuang's sword Dao could at least severely damage it. Jian Wushuang slowly ascended into the void, and his gaze then looked at the place where the armor body had fallen. The Xian Bone Road was already badly damaged, and one of the potholes reached the level of a bottomless abyss, and even Jian Wushuang could not see the situation. As Xingu Road no longer trembled, everything returned to dead silence. No way, is he really dead? Jian Wushuang was still a little unwilling to believe it, and his figure gradually went into the pothole. However, the next moment, the void suddenly became viscous and stagnated, as if it had become a solid. He was shocked, but his figure was no longer able to move, as if a million chains of qi luck had entangled him, making him unable to move. Then, black smoke quietly rose from the pothole, covering the sky and the sun. Along with the appearance of the black smoke, there was also a body that was as high as 10 million feet. A pair of true eyes are like 2 rounds of blood in the sky, only filled with endless hatred and resentment. Despicable Yanxian, today you will die for Zhen Weong first. The battle armor was roaring, and then he stood up from the abyss and slashed towards Jian Wushuang. This sword is full of determination and killing. But Jian Wushuang, who was trapped in his figure, couldn't avoid it at all, and could only watch the sword fall on his fairy body. Sneer. Divine blood spewed out, and Jiao Tian Yi Xian burst out with the most brilliant blue meaning, protecting his immortal body from being cut. However, this sword was a full blow from the 9th-rank Dian Immortal. Even if Jian Wushuang didn't cut Jian Wushuang into 2, it still broke his meridian every inch and turned it into powder. Jiao Tian Yi Xian then dimmed, and Jian Wushuang also fell back and fell quickly like a big sun star about to extinguish. The border barriers have been standing in the great wilderness for countless years, and despite being devastated, they still stand tall. Right now, Jian Wushuang, who was falling like a big sun, slammed into the boundary barrier. The boundary barrier is really too vast and magnificent. Even if the millions of celestial planes are added together, they can't be compared at all. Naturally, Jian Wushuang slammed into the boundary barrier and couldn't cause much disturbance. After the bang, a trace of the boundary barrier was knocked out, and Jian Wushuang, who had passed out, fell under the boundary barrier, which happened to be in the middle of the crack in the boundary barrier. Surrounded by the dragon-like thunder and lightning, and the black smoky armor, figures slowly got up, and then walked towards the border barrier. He came to the crack in the boundary barrier and looked at Jian Wushuang, whose fairy body was not broken, and doubts arose in his heart. But soon he directly waved his arm, and the endless gust of wind wrapped Jian Wushuang in a portable manner and blew it into the endless wilderness beyond the boundary barrier. Inside the border barrier, it belongs to the scope of the big division, while outside the border is the real waste. Even the unsatisfied Dian Immortal will get lost in the wilderness. That is a real forbidden place for one party, and there is no immortal involvement, except for certain specific existences. Jian Wushuang, who had passed out, naturally couldn't notice where he was now, and collapsed motionless in the thick dust. The figure of the battle armor was roaring dully, as if to vent the resentment that had existed in the past. He raised his head and stared closely at the magnificent border barrier, as if trying to identify where it was. Here where, why am I here? Is my heaven really broken? As the voice from eternity is full of sorrow, the violence has disappeared. The body shape of the armor is not as terrible as before, only confusion is left in his eyes, walking aimlessly on this fairy bone road. On the other side, Jian Wushuang, who had passed out in the great wilderness beyond the boundary barrier, was gently picked up by the palm of both hands at this moment. Master, look here, there is actually an immortal in the great wilderness. The still immature voice resounded in the thick dust. Then a dull but majestic voice resounded, quickly throw it away, it must be a dead body that has long been lost here. No, master, he is still alive, I heard his heart beating. What? It's still alive, how is this possible? As the noisy voice sounded, a total of 6 diamond-like figures appeared in the dust. These 6 Vajra-like figures are all dressed in pure monk clothes, and will be majestic without anger. And at the center of these 6 figures, there is a little novice monk with red lips and white teeth, and a very smart eyebrow. At this moment, the little novice monk was full of anxiety, and wrapped his thin arms around a figure, not caring that the falling blood wet his monk clothes. Masters, quickly save him, I feel he can still be saved. The little novice said anxiously, looking at the figures. As for the 6-dimensional diamond-like figure, calm and glanced at each other, and they all looked awkward. They set foot in the great wasteland, walked out of the great wasteland, and saw countless great crises. Now they have gone through all kinds of obstacles and walked out of the great wasteland, but when they encountered such a strange thing, they had to be vigilant. Among these figures, one of the most stable and old monk heads frowned slightly, as if he was hesitating. None of the fairy tales, and even Dian's celestial creature, was able to survive such severe damage. And it seemed that this young man Yenxian who had passed out seemed to have just experienced a desperate struggle, and it was very likely that he was the source of danger. All the worries had to make the monks hesitate. At this time, the little novice monk became anxious. Didn't you usually say you want to concentrate on doing good? How come you hesitate now? Concentration on goodness also depends on the situation. Huiqing, you are still young and don't understand this, said the monk with a rough face and thick eyebrows. I'm not young. I've been listening to the sermon for 30 million years just under the mulberry tree, the little novice monk argued angrily. Master, you are not doing this right. You obviously have the ability to save people, so why not save? Because we don't know him? The steady old monk head who has not spoken for a while, said helplessly, Okay, Huiqing, calm down, let's save it. The little novice nodded quickly. Huiqing thanked Master Father. After deciding to rescue each other, the 6 monks gathered together in the capital. The little novice hurriedly lifted Jian Wushuang, who was still unconscious, in his arms, and placed it in front of the 6 heads of monks. They looked at each other and then shot together. Huameng with infinite luck appeared one after another, covering Jian Wushuang's body one after another. Obscure and incomprehensible ciphertexts began to appear, and slowly rotated. Chapter 5107. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign with layers of ciphertext flowing and covering, it was covered with mist-like dust in the wilderness, and began to recede away. And in this extremely dark wilderness of ancient times, a bright color began to appear. Under the joint treatment of the 6 monk heads, Jian Wushuang's state also began to stabilize. The blood was not gushing out, and the broken meridians began to repair quickly. The immortal body was originally the supreme physique against the sky. After being protected, it recovered almost at a speed visible to the naked eye. After seeing Jian Wushuang's terrifying recovery speed, the steadily old monk head who has become the Master Father couldn't help but be surprised. Earlier he felt that Jian Wushuang, who had passed out, was no different from a dead body. There was no breath in his body, and his body had been broken into powder, and even Xian Yuan had disappeared. How can such a body be saved? Unexpectedly, but only a few dozen breaths of time passed, he has already recovered, and he can even breathe weakly. The 6 monk heads were naturally aware of this situation, and after seeing each other, they were a little surprised and disbelieved. Could it be that what we saved was really a shocking arrogance? The great elder was a little puzzled, and at the same time the vigilance in his heart slowly receded, because he didn't feel any uncomfortable breath from Jian Wushuang's body. After a few hundred breaths of time, the 6 monk heads stopped at the same time, and then the master and father proceeded to explore Jian Wushuang's breath. "How about master, are you out of danger?" Little novice Hui Qing asked nervously. The master nodded, then retracted his palm and said, "It's not a major problem, and I'm recovering very well. It seems I will wake up soon." The monk with a rough face and thick eyebrows was quite exclaimed, "This is really a miracle. It was so badly damaged in the Great Famine that it still survived. This is not easy." The master put his hands together. "Good, saving his life is a good fate. I hope that all the immortals will no longer suffer from the Great Famine." At this time, there was also a rather thin, clean-faced monk head, frowning slightly and said, "Brother, we have all passed through the great wilderness now, and we should be in the realm of the great division in front of us. There should be no great crisis anymore. But why is there still a very strong and manic killing intent here?" The master did not speak, but slowly turned around and looked at the direction of Desiu. There was an extremely dark void that was almost connected to the great wilderness. There was no big sun-shining star, and there was no celestial plane. Some are just border barriers that can't be looked directly at or spoken. The border barrier was too magnificent and vast, almost isolating everything and protecting the big division well. The master frowned slightly, his eyes revealed doubts. Could it be that the murderous aura came from the great division? Immediately afterwards, facing the rough, thick eyebrows, the monk head said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid this murderous aura is also inseparable from this kid. Do you want to wake him up and ask?" "No, he is still recovering, so I can't treat him like this." Little novice Hui Qing hurriedly protected Jian Wushuang. The master said calmly, "We have all walked through the desperate wilderness, so why are we afraid of these killing intents?" Another monk with a 3-flowered seal between his eyebrows nodded and said, "Big brother is right. How can a mere killing intent stop us? This time we must find other senior brothers. Finding them is not the goal. What we have to do is to realize the process. We can get out of the great famine, and it is not ourselves." After speaking these last words, the master turned and walked in the direction of Desiu. The other monk heads also followed closely. Facing the rugged monk with thick eyebrows and big eyes, said, "Hui Qing, since he is no longer a serious problem, we will leave him here. We have more important things to do." The little novice Hui Qing shook his head and said, "No, 3 masters, he is still in a coma, and he will definitely lose his life if he is thrown into this great wasteland. I think he must be an immortal in the Daisai domain, so it is better to bring him back to the Daisai domain." Seeing persuasion not to move, he had to give up. A group of monk heads walked out of the great wilderness and walked towards the great division. The killing karma is too heavy. No wonder the killing intent is so strong. This big division is really not a paradise. Stepping on the road of immortal bones made of countless immortal corpses, a crowd of monks frowned. They saw that everything that was cast in the great wilderness was a fairy bone. These celestial bones used to be a celestial being who had the ability to penetrate the sky and the earth, but now, they have lost everything and stood miserably in the wilderness for endless years. Stepping on the endless bones of immortals, a group of immortals have already come to the border barrier. Is this the passage opened by the predecessors? It is really a person with great perseverance. Facing the rugged monk with thick eyebrows and eyes, he exclaimed, and then folded his hands together. Indeed, it is already unthinkable to be able to break such a vast border barrier through a gap. Well, we have to go now, there is still a long way, we are all focused. After the master said, he walked into the border barrier. However, the thin little novice Hui Qing, carrying Jian Wushuang on his back, hung at the back of the masters. The border barrier is so magnificent to the extreme, it takes quite a long way to reach the Daisai domain. Headed by the master father, the team moved forward in the shape of a product. All around them, there was a faint radiant light of Buddha shrouded in them, to protect them. They all looked solemn and seemed to be quietly prepared to respond. Brother, do you feel that your blood is getting stronger and stronger? How can it be that this great wilderness will remain the same forever, and even the power of growth can't be produced at all? How can it be possible to retain blood? At this time, the little novice Huiqing, who carried Jian Wushuang on his back, raised his head and said very seriously, "But Master San, I also feel a powerful, very clear vitality approaching us." As soon as Huiqing's words came out, all the monks' faces became slightly solemn, and they looked up at the deserted surroundings. Be careful and vigilant. We have already walked out of the great wilderness. How can we be blocked from the great division? Grand Master frowned, his eyes solemn. At this moment, Jian Wushuang, who had been in a coma, slowly awakened. Huiqing noticed that Jian Wushuang was awakening behind him and was very happy. "Ah, are you awake? How fast?" He was at a loss first, looking at the strange monks in front of him, and combining the previous things, he quickly realized something. "Yes, you saved me? Of course, but don't take it seriously. This is what we should do." Chapter 5108. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign Little Novice Huiqing smiled and said, the kindness in his eyes was like a clear spring, pure to the extreme. Saving the life of a benevolent person is also a practice for us, a great kindness. Jian Wushuang's frowned brows slowly stretched, and then solemnly thanked him. Huiqing smiled again. "I really don't need to thank you. If you must thank my masters for saving you." He nodded solemnly, and then as if he realized something he asked, "You guys are from the world of Tong Tian Buddha?" "You? How do you know?" Huiqing opened her eyes wide and looked at him incredulously. However, just when he wanted to say more, a monk turned his head and shouted with a solemn expression, "Enough, Huiqing, don't say much." Huiqing was startled and nodded quickly, shutting up. It wasn't until the monk turned around that he lowered his voice and said, "I can't say too much, the masters are very strict with me." Jian Wushuang nodded, then walked away from Huiqing's thin back. He looked around and soon realized that it was extremely familiar here, and he was secretly surprised. "You have come to the border?" As soon as these words came out, all the monk capitals stopped and stared at Jian Wushuang like a glaring King Kong, as if they were ready to do anything. But Jian Wushuang didn't care about their gazes, and shouted anxiously, "Leave soon. If you don't leave, it will be too late. The boundary has changed." The master's brow furrowed, his eyes fixed on Jian Wushuang, as if trying to figure out the truth or falsehood of his words. And at this moment, a body that was as high as 10,000 meters, with the killing intent to obscure the void, quietly stood on the edge of the boundary barrier. Those red eyes, almost crazy and paranoid, looked at the monk heads with boundless anger. Jian Wushuang was the first to discover the existence of the battle armor figure, and shouted anxiously, "Go! He's here!" But it's too late. The killing intent that was enough to obscure the void swept across in an instant, and the 10 million meter thousand foot body of the battle armor also blasted fiercely. A huge remnant sword, tearing through the void, slashing down. A group of monk heads also noticed in an instant, and they shot at the same time without thinking. The extremely dazzling Buddha's light is accompanied by the power, and at this moment, it completely blooms with endless light and forms an enchantment to resist that sword. A sword tore through the void, sinking down with endless killing intent. OM. The gloomy remnant sword of blood slashed on the barrier, and the face of the Master Father, who was the first to face the brunt, suddenly changed, and then directly spit out the blood of the gods. The situation of the other 5 monk heads was not good. All of them were spit out a mouthful of divine blood, and their breath instantly wilted. And the Buddha light barrier was also instantly fragmented. "Master!" Huiqing shouted out of color. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth and directly released more than a dozen power trainings. After wrapping around the waists of a group of monk heads, he suddenly pulled them out of the range where the sword was cut. Boom! Xiangu Road instantly shattered a crack of millions of feet, and the immortal bones that had never been transformed have become fans. Under the dust of the sky, the heads of monks who were able to escape from the danger were pale, and their eyes filled with incredible expressions. Jian Wushuang gasped slightly, "Go fast, don't stop, go as far as you go." All the monks in the capital did not speak, but looked at the calm Master Father. Immediately afterwards, he spoke, already making a decision. "No, you can't take a step back. When we came here, we can't take a step back." Jian Wushuang was stunned, unable to speak for a while. Earlier, he felt that the strength of these monk heads was very terrifying. Except for a little novice, all were in the realm of Dian Immortal. Such a group of terrifying existences, even one, are terrifying existences capable of destroying countless universes. But there is something more terrifying than them, that is, the figure of the battle armor who has already entered the realm of the 9th rank Dian Immortal. He came from that ancient time, he has fallen asleep to this day, and awakened from his long sleep with an endless violent killing intent, an unimaginable existence. This is simply a very unequal battle. Facing such a 9th rank Dian Immortal, the 6 heads of monks are just looking for death. You figured it out, he is rank 9 Dian Immortal. Jian Wushuang frowned and reminded, "Even if it is rank 9, we can only move forward, not retreat." The master said in a deep voice, his eyes swept to the other monk heads. A group of monks in the capital nodded slightly, facing a 9th-ranked Dian Immortal who had come out of the Wangu era. They did not even have the slightest intention to retreat. "Are you crazy? Do you know what the 9th rank represents?" Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice, It's like sending you to death. Even if you die, you can't retreat." Grand Master said calmly, facing the figure of the armor that came, he greeted him. It belongs to the unique power light wheel of rank 6 Dian Immortal, and at this moment it blooms pure Buddha light power. Every time he took a step, the treasure face behind him solidified a bit. With his footsteps, the other 5 monk heads did not hesitate at all, and moved forward firmly. One person has 6 turns and 5 has 3 turns. Facing the figure of the battle armor who had already climbed into the 9th rank, Chi released his pure Buddha light. "Are you all crazy?" Jian Wushuang looked at this scene in disbelief, knowing that it was a mortal situation. Why did he seek death? At this time, the little novice monk Huiqing, who had not spoken, seemed to have made a decision and moved forward with firm eyes. But before he could take 2 steps, Jian Wushuang was pulled back with his collar. "Are you going to die?" Huiqing was grabbed by the collar and argued blushingly, "Good man, please let me go. This is a decision I made with the masters and will never change." Jian Wushuang said angrily, "Your masters are going to die. Instead of stopping you, you want to die with them? What stupid decision did you make?" Huiqing flushed and continued to argue, "We are not going to die. The great wasteland is so terrible that we have all walked over. How can we fall on the border of Desiyu?" Jian Wushuang looked solemnly. "I tell you, do you know what they are aware of? It's like a chasm, and there is no way to make it up." He opened his mouth and still stubbornly said, "Good man, please respect our decision, and please put me down." This is disrespect to the monk. Looking at the bean sprouts like little novice monk, Jian Wu was solemn on both sides, and then solemnly said, "I don't care about these monks or not. Since you saved me, I will never see you die. Saving a group is saving. Saving one is also saving." Huiqing opened his mouth slightly. For some reason, the obsession in his heart was loosened at this moment. And this is the first time he has had doubts since he had enlightened him for 30 million years. Chapter 5109. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. There is no mulberry tree under the enlightenment for 30 million years, which has strengthened Huiqing's Buddha heart. The purity and firmness of his heart made everyone who saw him sigh like a Buddha. He has never had a stage of doubt, and even any passage of scripture cannot confuse him. But now, facing such a big life and death situation, facing a young man Yanxian with firm eyes and the same purity, facing the startling question he issued. For the first time, Huiqing couldn't hold onto her heart. Could it be that the actions of the masters are wrong? Shouldn't they make such a decision? But my other masters, in order for us to be able to get out of the Great Wasteland, have already died in the Great Wasteland. If we return, how can we be worthy of them? After asking big questions, Hui Qing could no longer remain calm. He was stunned on the spot, not knowing what to plan. Seeing that Hui Qing was no longer impulsive, Jian Wushuang let go of him and turned to look at the situation where he had fallen into a battle. He frowned. At this moment, a small hand quietly grabbed the corner of his clothes and said in a trembling voice, Good man, you said that saving one is saving a group is also saving, and will save my master. Are you? Jian Wushuang turned around, looked at this little novice who still had some timidity in his eyes, and nodded his head. Since I have said it, I will do it, but I may not be able to save them all. Then there will be a good worker. The little novice Hui Qing folded her hands, and then looked at the masters who were in a battle in the void, and finally couldn't bear it. After making the decision, Jian Wushuang raised his palm subconsciously and touched Hui Qing's bare head. He reacted instantly, his face turned red, and he quickly apologized, then turned and rushed into the void without any hesitation. Hui Qing pursed her mouth, then subconsciously twisted her bare head. What? I must save my master. Border barriers. The void has been shattered and torn apart by the supreme derivation power, and the escaping derivation power has formed the most violent supreme vortex, a series of thunder and lightning as thick as a dragon, raging in the vortex, and then violently shot down. The boundary of the big division has been completely chaotic. All kinds of colorful divine blood spilled, because it was too pure to fall, hovering in the void, making the battlefield more tragic. The figure of the battle armor that is as high as tens of thousands of meters has completely fallen into violent madness. At this moment, the 6 monk heads are in a more miserable situation, relying on their physical advantages to barely deal with them. The gap between them is too unimaginable, like a chasm. Even if the treasures came out together, it would not cause much damage to the armor body. Once boarded the Dian Immortal, every major turn in it could not be compensated by any means. At the moment, among the 6 monk heads, there is only one 6th rank Dian Immortal. How can he fight the Nineth rank? This is also something Jian Wushuang can't understand. Wielding a broken sword that can cause heavy damage to Dian Immortal with every sword, the figure of the battle armor roared. All Zhen Weiyang's eagle dogs will be buried for my lord. Above the sky, the calm and old Master Father almost relied on his own power to withstand most of the offensive of the armor figure, and the precious appearance behind him had already dimmed to the extreme, and it seemed that it might disappear at any time. A series of extremely bright magic arts guarded him, and at the same time attracted most of the offensive of the armor figure. With a sword cut horizontally, Qin Jian directly blasted hundreds of magic formulas, including the Master Father. Moreover, the remnant sword was cast down unabated. Once it hits, even if he is rank 6 Dian Immortal, he will definitely die instantly. Brother! The other 5 monk heads yelled, but they had no time to give aid, so they could only watch the sword fall. The next moment, a figure quietly appeared under the remnant sword, and then raised the sword to respond. Zheng! The big sound of gold and iron strikes through the eternal void, and the extremely pure sword intent is also sprayed out, so that the extremely dark void is reflected. All monks' eyes were rounded and looked at this scene in disbelief. That Xiao Zhaoyangxian, who had fallen into the wilderness like a blood man before, almost knew his life and death, at this moment, used his own power to resist a sword. You know, that sword is the sword of rank 9 Dian Immortal. But this scene actually happened. Time seemed to stand still, and Jian Wushuang's brows trembled slightly under that sword. His right hand holding the invisible sword was already shattered, and the blood of God was spilled into the void. If it weren't for the terrifying defensive power of the immortal body, I'm afraid this sword would be able to make Jian Wushuang shatter into dust. But he still did it, facing up against the full force of the 9th rank Dian Immortal. The figure of the battle armor was also shocked, as if he had seen something impossible. You are not dead? Jian Wushuang pressed his eyebrows and quickly threw a D-pin pill in his mouth, thinking, it's not that easy to miss me. Then I will let you die again. The armor was furious, and at the same time, he wanted to raise his left hand and hit him. But at this moment, the 6 monk heads shot at the same time, a total of 6 pure Buddha light chains, layered around the left hand of the armor figure, making it difficult for him to lift it for a while. "Good man, go!" The master yelled loudly with a solemn expression. Jian Wushuang naturally didn't stay too much, and his figure instantly disappeared under broken sword. However, when he appeared again, he was in front of all the monk heads. "Leave quickly and leave it to me," he said in a condensed voice, showing his unquestionable majesty. Facing this young man who was just a fairy, all the monk heads did not underestimate it. They looked at each other, then looked at the master and father together. The Grand Master's expression was firm. Although hesitated in his eyes, he quickly disappeared. "You can't retreat, you can't retreat, you can only move forward. Can't you see where the situation is now? Do you want to die here?" Jian Wushuang shouted in a deep voice. The master looked at him. "Even so, we can't retreat. We will never retreat into the wilderness. Even if we die, we will die in the Big Division territory." Boom! When they talked, the battle armor figure slashed down with a sword, directly dispersing all the monk capitals. Jian Wushuang could not help but cursed an idiot secretly. At this time, the master said again, "My brothers, I will open the way for you, and go to see you." As his voice fell, a treasure phase condensed from pure Buddha's light, reflecting the emptiness. The injuries on the master's father's immortal body all recovered, as well as his luck in an instant. Layers of hazy Buddha light ciphertexts flowed slowly around him, as if the moon was setting and the sun was rising. His hands clasped together, a pair of true eyes released the supreme true power. The fairy body and the treasure image seemed to be completely integrated at this moment. Chapter 51:10. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. At this moment, the 5 monks had sad faces and the Buddha's light was sad. "Master." On Xingu Road, Hui Qing knelt down heavily, tears streaming down her face. The master, who has merged with the solemn treasure, is calm to the extreme from beginning to end. At this moment, there is only one enemy in his true eyes. "Senior brothers, go to see you together. Go to see you." The majestic Baoxiang bloomed with the supreme brilliance, reflecting the void that has never been shining forever. His face was solemn, his hands folded, facing the figure of the battle armor, he resolutely released the tactics. The dazzling ultimate magic formula blooms in the void, and the emptiness reaches the extreme. The figure of the battle armor that was as high as tens of thousands of feet also whispered at this moment, and the blood in his eyes was violent to the extreme. Facing the Buddha's light technique that covered the sky, he raised his sword to greet him. This is a sword that surpasses any previous style, the broken sword that has withered and even began to shatter from the blade. However, the sword intent that could not be arrogantly slashed towards the master and father, as well as the layers of the Buddha's light technique, with the intention to obscure the heavens. When the two collided, the immeasurable power that erupted directly sent Jian Wushuang, who wanted to rush to the rescue, as well as several monk capitals, and slammed into the vast and magnificent border barrier. The void was directly shattered, and the violent vortex was instantly torn to pieces. At this moment, the endless power was scattered in the void. The pure milky white Buddha's light, the pure sword intent, and the violent power are all intertwined in the void, so that the silent void of the eternal world is no longer silent. The little novice Hui Qing, who was kneeling on the Xingu Road, couldn't bear such a pressure at all, and directly drew out a large mouthful of divine blood, and his thin figure flew upside down. Immediately afterwards, a gentle force training protected Hui Qing and drew him towards the void. Good. He barely opened his eyes, and after uttering 2 words, he passed out in Jian Wushuang's arms. Jian Wushuang nodded, holding Hui Qing tightly in his arms, and then he looked into the void ahead. The void has collapsed and shattered, and there are 2 figures standing upright. The armor figure did not suffer any substantial damage, but the broken sword in his hand was completely shattered. Even the armor on his body was already broken. And the Master Father, who had already turned into a treasure-like image, was also severely injured, and the Buddha light enchantment around him had reached the extreme. The divine blood filled with Buddha's light spilled into the broken void, causing the void to slowly light up. The Master Father, with a calm light in his eyes, looked at the figure in the battle armor, and the whole body was surging again. His hands clasped together, and the prestige and majesty bloom forever. One thought of Buddha. At this moment, all the heavens in the void are shaking, and billions of Buddha's lights are rising like wisps of tassels. Including Jian Wushuang, all monk capitals opened their eyes wide. At such a moment, the Master, who was shrouded in the light of Buddha, seemed to transcend his own shackles and reached an unprecedented realm. One thought of the Buddha brings about billions of changes. Everything becomes dust, but the mind is everlasting. With him as the center, a billion-dollar treasure appeared, and then quietly opened his true eyes. In the true eyes like a bright moon, it seems to be full of endless compassion and supremacy. The supreme Buddha light obscures everything. Jian Wushuang only felt that his eyes were empty, as if he had entered a certain kind of nothingness, and he didn't even know how to avoid it. At this moment, the sky is dead, and there is no sound. I don't know how long it has passed. The extinguishment lasted for a long time. Jian Wushuang seemed to be on the ethereal waters, and only the sound of long water flowing like tides was heard. It wasn't until Hui Qing in her arms moved anxiously that Jian Wushuang recovered from the emptiness. The emptiness in his eyes disappeared, and the border wilderness reappeared in his eyes. Looking around, the endless void has turned into dust. The gray material like a tassel fell from the void and sprinkled to the wilderness. And under the shattered void, where the original Master and Father were, there is no longer any figure. Even the Buddha's light is already dim and weak. And the figure of the battle armor, which is as high as 10 million feet, is also quite miserable at this moment. A rotten battle armor has been completely shattered, and the exposed fairy body is almost torn apart, and the blood of the gods is thrown on the road of the bones, crumbling. This scene was too shocking. A rank 6 Dayan Immortal actually forced the Nineth rank Dayan Immortal to stop, and even suffered a severe blow. If this matter spreads to hundreds of millions of heavens, it will surely cause great shocks. This was also the first time Jian Wushuang had seen Yanxian who was able to cross the border to fight apart from him. However, the price paid by the Master and Father was even more severe. The immortal body turned into powder, and the divine consciousness was all melted away, only in exchange for the opportunity to severely injure the Nineth rank Dayan. The light of the Buddha in the sky finally melted, and the figure of the battle armor slowly turned around, looked at Jian Wushuang and the others, and then walked towards them. But just took a step, and the body like a sacred mountain fell heavily on the Xingu road, couldn't stand up for a while. Taking advantage of this time, Jian Wushuang turned and looked at the monk heads solemnly. "Why on earth do you have to enter the Desai domain?" The rugged monk with thick eyebrows and big eyes opened his mouth. "Because I am waiting to find the brothers who are living in the Desai domain." "Do you have to go?" "You must go." "In that case, you can go in here, and I'll block it for a moment." After speaking, Jian Wushuang directly sent Hui Qing back to the heads of monks, his expression beyond doubt. The 5 monks hesitated, and finally decided to leave. Thanks to the good people, there is no retribution. If you can meet again in the future, you will be reported. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly, then turned around. A group of monks hugged Hui Qing, who was still in a coma, and stepped into the Great Division domain from the Xingu road. But Jian Wushuang was alone, facing the battle armor figure lying on his back on Xianbone Road. His eyes were extremely calm. "Brother, are we really going to keep him and enter the Great Division? He is an immortal, leaving him is tantamount to letting him die. There's nothing we can do. If we don't do this, everything we have done before will be defeated. I hope he can leave alive, otherwise it will be a disaster for us." "No, I don't think he is like a fairy tale. How could ordinary fairy tales wander along the border of the great wilderness? I'm afraid that even the Dayan fairy in the initial realm can't stay in the great wilderness, right?" Could it be that he deliberately concealed his true strength? He has the confidence to fight the 9th-ranked Dayan immortal? If there is no foundation, who would dare to face an existence that is too much stronger than oneself? I hope. So, I only hope that the good people can leave safely. Chapter 5111. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. The armor figure knelt down on the Xingu road, and seemed to have suffered the most severe damage, and he couldn't even stand up. He closed his eyes tightly, and a series of hideous cracks appeared on his 10,000-foot body, and countless gray silk threads poured out from the cracks in his body, and then scattered on the road of the bones. Standing in the void, Jian Wushuang frowned and watched this scene. He had an intuition that for a while, the figure in the battle armor would never have the power to fight. He hesitated for a moment, not knowing whether he shot a fatal blow to the armor shape or left. After thinking for a moment, a cold light flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes, and the invisible sword reappeared between his palms. He has decided to take this opportunity to erase the figure of the battle armor. He slept for countless years, and went through a battle between emperors and kings in the Wangu era. His existence is a huge factor of instability. If he enters the Great Division from the Great Wilderness, it will inevitably cause irreversible damage to the ordinary heavenly plane. So at this moment, Jian Wushuang, standing in the border wilderness, made a decision. The invisible sword in his hand was already dazzling to the extreme, with divine patterns lingering. The battle armor is the 9th-rank Dayan immortal. Even if he sleeps for countless years, his strength is still terrifying to the extreme. The realm gap between Jian Wushuang and him is really too big, almost an unimaginable gap. If you want a sword to cause real damage, or even obliteration, only one sword can do it. Wushuang Kendo, the 3rd style of Xinghuhai, the lake. The sword intent in the form of a lake character, ignoring any realm restrictions, ignoring any laws and orders, even facing the emperor, can burst out a sword that can't be said. This sword is a sword that Jian Wushuang is comparable to Jian Xian, and has only been used a few times since he realized it. At this moment, the invisible sword is already shining to the extreme. If it were not for the lack of a sword body, it would inevitably sound like a Wushuang sword. Jian Wushuang stood far away in the void, his eyes closed tightly, and a general trend that could not be arrogantly condensed around him. This is the front of that sword, filled with an unstoppable breath. However, in a flash, the sword power under Jian Wushuang disappeared, and then he opened his eyes and shook his head slightly, no longer intending to use that sword. It is true that the Wushuang Kendo 3rd style lake is his strongest sword, but the price of using this sword is currently he cannot bear. Once one's own power dries up and cannot be replenished in a short time, then in this great wilderness, it is almost sentenced to death. Therefore, Jian Wushuang could not bear this price. Facing the battle armor figure kneeling on the Xianbone road, another sword surging up to obscure the void. It was shining invisibly, and a little bit of cold light bloomed from the tip of the sword, full of an indomitable force of decisiveness. This is a sword of the sword fairy Ding Bai, a superb sword. This is a sword for death, but also a sword for life to death. At this moment, Jian Wushuang asked for a sword. Ding, the extremely crisp sword sound resounded under the void, like a ring of ding-dong, with a crisp sound. The invisible sword burst out of pure milky white meaning, and hundreds of millions of sword intent were all in one. Although this sword was an absolute sword, it didn't have any fancy meaning, only a counterattack erupted from death. The void trembles, and the general trend is here. Facing the battle armor figure who was kneeling on the Xianbone road, this type of absolute sword pierced his head. Boom! Void couldn't bear this sword, and was quickly fragmented. Jian Wushuang shouted in a low voice and his eyes were red. This sword was so exhausting that he couldn't control it faintly. The void is broken, and a sword is here. But almost at the same time, the figure of the battle armor that was kneeling on the Xingu road suddenly raised its head, and at the same time, it swung its big palm covering the sky and hit Jian Wushuang. When the two collided, this type of absolute sword directly pierced the giant palm of the armor-shaped smashing sky, and slammed it into his head unabated. This is the absolute sword. The long sword arrives and the cold light comes. A sword pierced into the brow of the battle armor figure, only to pause for a moment, and then all fell into it. Jian Wushuang was also exhausted. His right arm holding the invisible sword was already dripping with blood. The battle armor roared in pain, centered on the eyebrows, and the cracks instantly covered the body of thousands of feet. He was uneasy, screaming in pain, and tried to stand up from Xingu Road. However, with each shaking of his body, the fragmentation became more severe. In the end, with a bang, the body that was as high as tens of thousands of meters turned into powder, covering the Xingu Road. The endless dust spreads and obscures the void. Jian Wushuang panted heavily, his chest undulating. This time, he paid a very small price to wipe out a 9th-rank Great Yen Immortal, which is really unimaginable. However, he was still a little worried that the armor figure would not die so easily. After all, the realm between them is like a chasm. Each level is a big change, a big leap. Jian Wushuang knew that he could face rank 3 and even rank 6 Dian Immortal, but he was very clearly aware that facing rank 9 Dian Immortal, he did not have the slightest chance. Above rank 6 is rank 9. The so-called rank 9 is a kind of detached existence. Because rank 9 can perceive the Emperor's luck, it is an absolute existence that cannot be arbitrarily stated. It is precisely because of this that Jian Wushuang would not believe that the shape of the battle armor would die so easily. Could it be that he is really gone? Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, still a little unbelievable. After thinking for a while, he descended on the Xingu Road, staring at the location where the armor figure had died. By this look, his expression became steep and solemn again. Because he saw that above the position where the body of the battle armor had died, there were inexhaustible gray silk threads in a very regular rhythm. Jian Wushuang secretly said his target. With the lessons learned before, he did not dare to keep his hands at this moment, and went all out to release his majestic strength. The blazing power was violent and surging, and quickly covered every inch of the fairy bone road like sky fire. After touching the strength of Jian Wushuang, the gray silk thread directly turned into a wisp of blue smoke, but more gray silk threads got into the road of Xingu. Click, click. A loud and noisy voice quietly resounded under Xingu Road. Jian Wushuang stepped back subconsciously, his expression completely solemn. With a fine and noisy sound resounding, Xiangulu began to tremble. This tremor began to become more and more intense, and the road surface of Xingu Road began to collapse, and a strong breath suddenly rushed out from below. Jian Wushuang was shocked. That strong aura turned out to be an extremely familiar force. The great frontier wilderness, which was unable to give birth to a generative force at all, has unexpectedly emerged a generative force that has never existed before. Chapter 51:12. Wan Dao Sword Sovereign. Moreover, the strength that rushed from under the Xingu Road was so strong that it was almost as solid as the essence, which surprised Jian Wushuang. This was originally the road forged by the bones of the Xianxian who died in the past. They have all died for countless years, and the source of the Xianyuan belongs to the world, and there is no possibility of recovery at all. But at the moment, such a majestic and strong strength can never be released by a fairy. Looking at the Yanli that almost obscured the void, Jian Wushuang suddenly realized that something was resurrecting under the Xingu Road. Boom! Xingu Road collapsed, and countless dead bones were turned into powder and dissipated. In the place where the body of the battle armor had been destroyed, a skinny palm appeared from the pit of the abyss. Then, a ragged, lustrous skeleton without a body walked out. In the chest cavity of the skeleton, a mass of gray matter was beating. As this bone came out, more bones began to come out continuously from under the abyss. 5 ways. 10 ways. 20. More and more fairy bones recovered and walked out. The substantive strength is released by them. Jian Wushuang slowly backed away, horrified in his eyes. The army of immortal bones he had met once in the endless sea, under the river of blood of 10,000 immortal bones. However, The two cannot be compared at all. Most of the bones of the immortal bones under the river of blood of the 10,000 immortal bones are immortal, only a very small number of the immortal bones of Dian. But right now, in this border wilderness, every revived fairy bone carries a majestic trend. This general trend is impossible for Yanxian to possess, only Dianxian can control. In other words, at this moment, every revived bone is Dian. Jian Wushuang kept retreating, and there was already a big crisis in his heart. Under Xinggu Road, it seems that all the gods are resurrecting and appearing constantly. Every fairy bone seemed to maintain the fighting posture on the eve of the death. They either hold long swords or hold various magic weapons, and their circulation is surging to the extreme. Go! This was Jian Wushuang's only thought. He couldn't deal with so many fairy bones at all, and could only escape at the fastest speed. However, the scene that appeared next made his complexion even more ugly. He saw that in front of the fairy bones, countless gray silk threads quietly gathered into a body. The body was extremely strong, and a rotten silver armor still reflected mottled cold light. Even though that body had become smaller, Jian Wushuang still saw at a glance that he was in the form of a battle armor that was as high as 10 million feet before. At this moment, instead of dying out, he turned into a normal-sized figure, seeming to have recovered from the heavy damage. All the fairy bones were standing behind him, seemingly waiting for an order. The armor figure looked at Jian Wushuang. His true eyes were already bleeding. He held a long sword of unknown material in his hand and pointed straight forward. Zhen Weiyang's eagle dog will surely turn into a skeleton today and cannot escape. Jian Wushuang's secret path was bad, so he turned and fled. The long sword in the armor figure volleyed with a finger, almost trembling, and the voice resounded. Former generals, go to Zhenweiyang Imperial Court together. All the fairy bones responded, and then rushed towards Desiyu, towards the departing Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang only felt that there was an unreasonable general trend behind him, and he didn't know how to resist, so he tried his best to escape. But before he escaped the border, the appearance of the oncoming body surprised him. Why are you back again? Those who came back were just the heads of monks who had entered the Desai domain before, and at this moment all of them had returned. They also looked anxious, and seemed to have gone through a big battle, and their whole boda's strength was fluctuating violently. The head of the monk looked hard to see the extreme, and seemed to be seriously injured. In the front, there are countless bones suddenly appearing. They are powerful. We can't break in. We can only turn back and find a way. Hearing what he said, Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. I was also chased by the army of bones. What? The heads of monks looked shocked, and then they saw countless celestial bones stepping through the void, chasing them. How is it possible that there are these bones before and after? Are we destined to be unable to enter the main domain? The head of a monk with a 3-flower seal inscribed between his eyebrows said with a sad look. There must be a way. These skeletons are not a concern. The rough-faced monk head said firmly. The slender head of the monk frowned. But there are too many, and I can feel the strength of these bones is terrible. The head of the monk with a rough face and thick eyebrows said without hesitation, Second brother, you just leave with Hui Qing, and I'll wait to make the way for you. The other monks nodded without hesitation. However, this decision was directly rejected by the head of the monk who does not need to clean the face. If you want to open the way, I should do it, and you should take Hui Qing and leave. There are too many bones, and the second senior brother can never stop it, and I will stay too, said a monk with a tough face and a strong figure. The head of the monk with a 3-flower print between his brows also said calmly, I will stay too. The monk with a rough face and thick eyebrows tightened Hui Qing in his arms, and said anxiously, leave them all. Who will send Hui Qing? Hui Qing, who will send it? For some reason, at this moment, all the monk capitals looked at Jian Wushuang. Then, the slender monk with a clean face and no need put his hands together. Good man, can you send Hui Qing safely to Desiyu? I will make a way for the good man. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. He had already seen in front and behind him. He was surrounded by countless celestial bones. If you want to go together. These fairy bones are definitely not something you can resist. the head of the monk who cleans his face and does not need to put his hands together again, I also ask the good men to agree. I am willing to open a way for the good men. Seeing more and more immortal bones, Jian Wushuang was very anxious. If you continue speaking, you really can't go. If you want to go together, I can take him away. Goodness! The 5 heads of monks put their hands together at the same time. Immediately afterwards, the monk head with a rough face and thick eyebrows and eyes quickly came to Jian Wufang and handed the little novice Hui Qing, who was still sleeping, into his arms. After doing all this, a total of 5 monk heads released their respective powers at the same time. 5 Dayan immortals, 5 3-turn. Facing the seemingly endless army of bones, they calmly shot. The milky white Buddha light suddenly appeared in the void like a stellar sun, and its surging power was also revealed at this moment. Chapter 51:13. One Dao Sword Sovereign Song. Boom. Kul. Weng Long, a dull and depressed shout, burst out from the void. One after another came from the shining sound of ancient times. The sound was like a long, narrow and simple sharp blade. The gray and simple armor had long been broken, and the rotting and rotten body at this moment renewed the breath of the ancient times. Jian Wudo looked at the immortal bones that struck in front of him expressionlessly, and his body was wrapped in the light of the 5 monks' heads. This soft light was gentle, but extremely sharp, and even affected the strands in his body. Karma kills robbery. Good person, just take the opportunity to rush out. With my support, no need to worry. The rough monk has a golden light on his back. Although he is only the 3rd-ranked Dayan immortal, his face can match the 6th-ranked Dayan immortal. With the blessing of the 5 people, there is an unmatched power. You are sending death. Jian Wushuang's voice trembled. These monk heads were as stubborn as Yu Chang said. They didn't want to join forces to rush out. They really wanted to desperately protect him and the young novice monk from the skeletal army and enter the big division domain. He was originally the great Siyu immortal, and he was ordered to come to the great wilderness to repair the boundary wall, but knew that even if the skeletal army in front was highlighted, he would face an infinite wilderness. Without Yu Chang's guidance, it would be a dead end. And there was a truly unrivaled existence under the pile of bones. To be able to explode such a majestic power in the great wilderness, the strength of the opponent is not what they can match. You have been saving my life when you wait, and I will do it when I promised you, without your life being protected. The sword intent within Jian Wushuang rose, and the sudden appearance of Yan Li restored his strength to its peak. At this moment, the combat strength was no worse than the combined strength of the 5 of them. Suddenly roars came from the void. Truwiang, Truwiang, Truwiang. With a piercing cry, the army of bones in the void was stunned. Then he stopped, all turned to face the direction of the sound, and knelt down. Welcome, my lord. Welcome, my lord. Welcome, my lord. As soon as the corpse army knelt down, Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed, and he immediately said, "It's now, all follow me." The 5 monk heads who had originally planned to go to death to resist only froze for a while, and then followed Jian Wushuang and quickly escaped into the void. A few of them are extremely fast, shaking the void and making ripples. On the way to escape, the rugged monk had already put away the faxiang, frowned and quickly asked, "Why do you wait for a good man to flee in the opposite direction? I am in front of the Buddha realm." The little novice was holding Jian Wushuang's arm and also raised his head to look at Jian Wushuang. "I am waiting to come here from the Buddhist realm, but I have traveled through the entire wilderness, which is perilous, and obviously more than half of the corpse army is here." Several monks in the capital were uneasy. They were not afraid of death. They were just afraid that death was worthless. Even if all of them died, it would be worthwhile for one person to survive. But if they all died in the wilderness with Jian Wushuang, and it is a great sin to flee in the direction of the world of Tongtian Buddha. Originally came from the world of Tongtian Buddhism, went to the remote Siyu to save the supreme merit of transforming immortals. At this time, abandoning thousands of years of Taoism, just to survive, this has run counter to their Tao. Unknowingly, Jian Wushuang strayed away, making them feel a little uncomfortable. But thinking back to the countless corpse army just now, they also knew in their hearts that no matter which way they ran, there was no chance of survival. Jian Wushuang, holding the little novice monk in one hand, looked back with a stern expression, and then rushed towards the great wilderness without any reduction in speed. Don't you feel the pressure of Tao and you are waking up? The heads of several monks were shocked. They were all 3-ranked Dayan immortal level monk heads. How strong the sense of power was, but the coercion was just like nothing. No, that coercion is not an army of corpses, nor is it the armored powerhouse. The white-faced and needless Jingshou monk tremblingly said, "Second brother, I feel it. It came from the void on the side of Desu, under the corpse." Not only did several people take a breath, the coercion of the awake existence that was awakening could actually be comparable to countless corpses. How powerful this would be! Such a terrifying coercion already has great freedom. Fortunately, there are good people to guide me. Otherwise, when I encounter such existence, I am afraid I will be annihilated in an instant. When several monk heads went to look at Jian Wushuang's figure again, their hearts were fixed. The other party was definitely a top monk in the big division domain, at least a powerful existence comparable to rank 6 Dayan Immortal. Click. Just after a few people were surprised, after a brief silence, a corpse comparable to the Dayan Immortal suddenly turned his neck and looked at the few people who were fleeing. The dark eyes instantly turned scarlet. In an instant, all the kneeling corpses turned their heads. The headed few withered armor warned, their eyes turned. Don't wait for my lord here, you wait to kill Zhen Weiyang's lackeys, don't let go of Oni's. The bodies of countless corpses underneath turned stiffly, but the terrifying aura that erupted subsequently damaged the entire void. The hideous crack in the boundary wall is also accelerating its expansion. Although it cannot completely tear the entire boundary wall, it has also become dilapidated. Countless corpses followed one after another, attacking Jian Wushuang and others. The head of the 9th-ranked Dayan Immortal headed by him was badly damaged, leaving only one scarlet eye and a few pale fangs. Ordered to kill the rebel, boom. A skeletal war repairer, holding a piercing spear with dark blood stains on top. Looking at the people who fled, he leaned back, and then threw his spear to Jian Wushuang and others heavily. The terrifying gray-white spear exploded in the void, first shattering the mirror-like void, and then smashing pieces of broken void mirrors, only to instantly change to everyone's eyes. Jian Wushuang, carrying the little novice monk in one hand, stopped abruptly, then stood in the void, holding the divine sword upside down with one hand, and suddenly turned his head. His long hair covered his eyes, but he could still see that the handle had arrived. The spear in front of you. The Wushuang divine sword suddenly slashed out, and a wave of violent sword aura burst out, but it was not able to master the sharpness of the spear. Good man, I will help you. The rough monk raised his palm first, and the giant palm suddenly appeared golden, first entered the void and then shattered the void. This rough palm of the monk head exerted his full strength. He knew that this was not the time to preserve his strength. First, there was a palm and then another palm. In an instant, hundreds of millions of palm prints spread all over the void, and then they overlapped one by one, with thousands of palms facing the spear. Buddhism and thousand hands are one. This is great comfort. At this moment, the rough monk exploded with unprecedented momentum. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.